She pressed her fingers against the woman's bruised wrist and felt the pattern of old fractures beneath new wounds. Claire's breath stopped. This wasn't a car accident. Someone had been breaking this woman apart for months. The hospital records said otherwise. The police report said otherwise. Every official document in the system said otherwise. But Claire's hands knew the truth that paperwork was paid to hide. And the woman on the table, barely conscious, barely breathing, grabbed Claire's sleeve and whispered a name that made every nurse in the room go silent. Before we go any further, if this story already has your heart pounding, please take a moment right now to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. Drop a comment below and tell us what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story has traveled. Now let's go back to that hospital room, because what happened next changed everything. The emergency room at Hargrove Private Medical Center was never supposed to be a battlefield. It was supposed to be a sanctuary. That was what Claire Bennett had always believed from the first day she walked through those doors at 26 years old, as a resident terrified and determined to the morning she stood there at 32, as one of the most respected emergency physicians in Boston. 6 years of fighting for people at their worst moments. 6 years of learning that the body never lied, even when the person inside it had no choice but to. The night of March 14th arrived like any other. Rain against the windows. The low hum of monitors. The particular kind of exhaustion that lived in fluorescent lighting and cold coffee. Claire was finishing her notes on a chest trauma case when the radio crackled. Incoming. Female late 30s. Multi-vehicle collision on Storrow Drive. Vitals unstable. ETA 3 minutes. She didn't look up from her chart. What's her pressure? 80/40 and dropping. Now she looked up. Get me a trauma bay. The woman arrived in a storm of controlled chaos. Paramedics calling numbers. Nurses responding with equipment, the particular language of emergency medicine that Claire had learned to speak fluently without thinking. She moved to the head of the gurney before it stopped rolling. First assessment. Always fast, always thorough. The woman was beautiful even now. Dark hair matted against pale skin. A silk dress that had once been expensive now torn and stained. Jewelry that was real. Claire could tell the difference. Someone had called the ambulance from a phone that cost more than most people's monthly rent. But none of that mattered. What mattered was what Claire's hands found in the first 30 seconds. Laceration above the left brow, contusions along the rib cage, fracture at the left radius. She called it out as she moved. Possible internal bleeding. Get me ultrasound. Standard. All consistent with a vehicle collision. Then she checked the woman's left arm. Her gloved fingers paused. There was something wrong with the bone structure beneath the newest bruising. Not wrong in the way that accidents created. Wrong in a different way entirely. The way that repetition created. The way that something happening more than once over months left its signature in the tissue and calcium deposits of a human body the same way a river carved stone. Claire pressed carefully along the forearm. Old fracture. Healed improperly. At least 4 months ago. She checked the right wrist. Same story, different date. She moved to the ribs. 2 on the left side showed shadow bruising beneath the fresh impact damage. The pattern was wrong for a car crash. The angle was wrong. The depth was wrong. Everything was wrong. Get me her chart, Claire said. Her voice stayed flat. Practiced control. She came in unaccompanied. No ID on her person. Name from the accident report is Victoria Hayes. Insurance. Premium private coverage. Platinum tier. I need her full medical history. Anything connected to that name in the Massachusetts system. The nurse nodded and moved to the station. Claire continued working. She didn't slow down for the questions building in her chest. Questions were for later. Right now, the woman on the table needed blood pressure and oxygen and a skilled pair of hands that weren't distracted by suspicion. But Claire was already suspicious. The ultrasound showed no critical internal bleeding, a small mercy. The laceration above the brow required stitches. The radius fracture needed imaging and casting. None of it was immediately life-threatening. The woman was stabilized within 20 minutes. And then she woke up. Not all the way. Not clearly. The way people woke when consciousness crept back through heavy sedation, confused and afraid, reaching for something familiar in a world that had become terrifying. "Hey!" Claire leaned close. "You're safe. You're in the hospital. Can you hear me?" The woman's eyes opened halfway. Green. Extraordinarily clear, even through the fog of medication. "Don't." She tried to sit up. "Easy." Claire put a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You were in an accident. You have a fracture in your arm, and we need to—" "No." The woman's hand came up and grabbed Claire's wrist. The grip was surprisingly strong. Don't call anyone. Don't put my name in any system." Claire met her eyes steadily. "We've already run your insurance." Something moved across the woman's face. Fear. Real fear. Not the fear of a car accident. The fear of something much larger closing in. Then they already know. Who knows? But Victoria Hayes closed her eyes again and didn't answer. The medical history arrived 20 minutes later, and Claire read it 3 times. Then she read it a 4th time, because she needed to be certain she wasn't misunderstanding. Victoria Hayes had seen 7 different physicians in the past 18 months, across 4 different hospitals in Boston. Every single record was remarkably consistent. Annual checkups, minor illnesses, a sprained ankle 8 months ago from a hiking trip, a mild respiratory infection in December. Perfect. Clean. Utterly ordinary. Claire put the file down on the counter and looked at the woman lying in the bay with her arm in a temporary splint and her face turning toward a bruise that hadn't been there 6 months ago, because the photographs from that hiking trip checkup included in the file showed her face clearly, and there was nothing wrong with it. Someone had written these records. Someone had taken the actual truth of what Victoria Hayes's body looked like. The healed fractures, the old bruising patterns, the months of accumulated damage, and replaced it with a clean, believable fiction. That required money. Not a small amount of money. That required access. Not easy access. That required multiple people in multiple facilities agreeing to participate in erasing a woman's medical reality. Claire stood very still for a long moment. She was an emergency physician, not a detective. She treated injuries, not conspiracies. Her job was to heal the body in front of her, not to untangle whatever nightmare that body had lived through. She knew all of that. And then she went back into the bay and sat down next to Victoria Hayes. "I need to ask you something," Claire said quietly. "And I need you to be honest with me." Victoria's eyes opened. That green gaze sharper now. Calculating. "The injuries you came in with tonight are not all from tonight." Claire said it plainly. No softening. "The fractures in your arm there are at least 2 separate healing events that happened months before tonight's accident. The bruising pattern on your ribs is not consistent with a vehicle impact, and your medical records have been altered, professionally altered." Victoria said nothing. "Someone has been hurting you," Claire continued, "for a long time, and someone with significant resources has been hiding it." Still nothing. "I can't help you the way you need to be helped if I don't know what I'm dealing with." Claire leaned forward slightly. "So I'm asking you directly, who did this to you?" The silence stretched for 10 seconds. 20. 30. Then Victoria Hayes turned her head and looked at Claire with an expression that was not fear anymore, but something colder, something resigned. "If I tell you," Victoria said slowly, "you will be in danger." "I'm already in danger," Claire said. "I've read your records." Victoria almost smiled. Almost. "You don't know what that means yet." "Then explain it to me." Another silence. Outside the bay curtain, the emergency room moved and breathed and did its ordinary work. Someone was being wheeled past. A monitor was beeping. A child somewhere was crying. Normal life happening 20 feet away from something that was not normal at all. "His name is Richard Calloway," Victoria said, finally her voice barely above the threshold of sound. "He owns 3 construction companies, a shipping brokerage, and a seat on the Boston City Council. He is also the man who has been systematically destroying my body for 14 months. Claire kept her face controlled. "Why haven't you gone to the police?" "Because the last time I tried the officer who took my report was at his dinner table that same night." Victoria's voice carried no emotion now. No anger. Just the flat recitation of someone who had moved past the stage of being shocked by things. Calloway owns a great many people. More than most people would believe. Your medical records were altered by a physician at St. Catherine's who accepted a very large sum of money, and one at Mercy General, and one at the Hargrove Clinic on Westfield Street. Victoria paused. Your hospital has a clinic. The physician there is a man named Dr. Reeves. Claire felt ice move through her chest. Dr. Reeves had been at Hargrove for 11 years. He was quiet, reliable. He attended every department meeting and remembered everyone's birthday. You've done your research, Claire said carefully. I've spent 14 months trying to find a way out, Victoria said. Research is what you do when violence isn't an option. Claire was quiet for a moment. What is your way out? Victoria looked at her. Really looked at her, the kind of look that measured something. There's a man, Victoria said. He is not a good man by conventional standards. He's done things I won't pretend to justify. But he is the only person in this city who has both the resources and the motivation to stop Richard Calloway. Who? Victoria hesitated. His name is Adrian Morelli. The curtain at the bay entrance seemed to go very still. The ambient sound of the emergency room continued, but something in Claire's immediate awareness narrowed. She knew the name. Everyone in Boston knew the name. Adrian Morelli appeared in newspapers twice a year, once in the business section profiled as a billionaire investor whose holding company had interests in real estate, private equity, and international logistics. And once usually in the crime section, where federal investigators and city prosecutors spent several paragraphs explaining why they were still building a case against him and would have something concrete very soon. They had been saying very soon for 9 years. Why would Adrian Morelli help you? Claire asked. Victoria's expression shifted. Something complicated moved behind her eyes. Because Richard Calloway stole something from him 2 years ago. A financial transaction that Calloway disguised as a business dispute. A clean, legal-looking theft of an amount large enough that Morelli has been looking for a way to reclaim it ever since. Without evidence, he can act on. He has no justification to move against a city council member without starting a war he'd prefer to avoid. And you have evidence. I have the documentation. I've had it for 8 months. Victoria's voice tightened slightly. I couldn't get out long enough to deliver it. Every time I tried to arrange contact with Morelli's organization, Calloway's people found out within 48 hours. He has someone embedded near Morelli's operation. She stopped. But Calloway's people don't know I'm here tonight. The accident, the car collision, was real. I wasn't planning this. It happened, and the ambulance brought me here, and now I am here in a hospital where Calloway hasn't yet had time to reach everyone. Claire understood what was being asked before it was asked. You want me to contact Morelli? I need someone he doesn't already know, someone his people and Calloway's people aren't watching. Victoria's hand found Claire's arm again. I know this is an enormous thing to ask of someone. I know what I'm asking you to step into. Tell me exactly what you need me to do. Victoria closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, they were steady. In my left shoe, they brought my belongings in a bag with the ambulance intake. There is a small folded paper. On it is a phone number. You send one text to that number. She paused. The message is already written in my head. 6 words. He'll understand what they mean. What are the 6 words? Victoria told her. Claire memorized them. Then, Victoria's blood pressure dropped suddenly and sharply, a delayed reaction in her system to the physical trauma of the accident, and the moment dissolved into the urgency of medicine, monitors, alarming Claire, calling orders, nurses responding, the whole machinery of saving a life, engaging at full speed. For the next 40 minutes, Claire did not think about anything except keeping Victoria Hayes alive. When the crisis stabilized and Victoria was moved to the ICU and the bay was quiet again, Claire stood at the sink, washing her hands, and looked at herself in the mirror above it. She was 32 years old. She was an emergency physician. She had a license, a lease, a retirement account, and a mother who called her every Sunday. She had never done anything more illegal than a parking violation. She thought about what Victoria had told her, about Richard Calloway and the officers at his dinner table, and the physicians who had been paid to erase a woman's pain from the official record. She thought about the old fractures under the new bruising. She thought about what it took to break someone's arm and then make sure the world never found out. She dried her hands. She found the evidence bag with Victoria's belongings and located the left shoe. The folded paper was there. The number was there. Claire typed it into her personal phone, not the hospital phone, not any device connected to Hargrove's system. Her personal phone, the one that belonged only to her. She typed 6 words. She survived. They know you know. She pressed send. Then she put her phone in her pocket and went back to work, because there were still patients who needed her, and the emergency room did not stop for anyone's crisis of conscience. Her phone vibrated 10 minutes later. The reply was 2 words. On my way. She hadn't told anyone. That was the thing that pressed against her ribs for the next hour. Not guilt exactly, but the weight of knowing. She had not told the charge nurse. She had not called the hospital administrator. She had not dialed the number for the Boston Police Department, which was posted on a laminated card near the nurse's station, along with the poison control number and the number for the on-call chaplain. She had sent a message to a crime figure. A billionaire crime figure, which was somehow both more and less alarming than a regular one. Claire had spent the hour reviewing what she knew about Adrian Morelli, which was what most people knew the publicly available version. 41 years old. Born in Providence, Rhode Island, to a family with roots in the old organized crime structures of the northeastern seaboard. Had built a legitimate business empire in his 30s that was real enough, successful enough that separating it from his other activities was apparently the thing that kept federal prosecutors awake at night. Photographs showed a man with a face that was striking without being conventionally handsome. Dark hair going silver at the temples. Eyes that newspaper photographers always seemed to catch at an angle that made them look calculating. He arrived at 37 minutes past midnight. Claire knew he was there before she saw him because of the quality of the silence that moved through the emergency room ahead of him. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was the kind of quiet that happened when everyone in a room made the same unconscious decision to take up less space. She was standing at the nurse's station when she looked up and saw him walking toward her, and her first thought, completely involuntary, a little embarrassing, was that he was taller in person than photographs suggested. Her second thought was that he looked terrified, not visibly, not in the way that most people expressed fear. But Claire had spent 6 years reading Bodies Under Pressure, and what she saw in Adrian Morelli's face as he crossed the emergency room was not the composure of a powerful man arriving on his own terms. It was the controlled panic of someone who had been waiting for the worst news of his life. He stopped 3 feet from her. Up close, the calculation in his eyes was real, but so was something else underneath it. "You sent the message," he said. It wasn't a question. "I'm Dr. Bennett." She kept her voice professional, even. "I'm the physician treating the patient you're here to see." Is she alive? The directness of it surprised her slightly. No preamble, no performance. "She's stable," Claire said. "She's in the ICU. She's going to recover." Something moved across his face. She couldn't name it precisely, relief maybe, or the aftermath of relief, which looked different. "I need to see her. ICU visiting hours. I need to see her." His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Claire looked at him for a moment. "Before I take you anywhere in this hospital," she said, "I need to tell you something." He waited. "The patient's injuries are not consistent with tonight's accident. She has a pattern of old fractures and healed bruising, indicating sustained physical abuse over an extended period. Her medical records have been falsified across multiple facilities, and at least one physician connected to this hospital has been paid to participate in that falsification." Claire kept her eyes on his. "I've contacted no one else about this. I sent you the message she requested. But I am not going to pretend I don't know what I've walked into, and I am not going to be managed or misled about what happens next. Are we clear?" Silence. Adrian Morelli looked at her for a long moment. "You're not afraid of me," he said. Not admiringly. More like he was cataloging an unexpected variable. "Right now, I'm more concerned about my patient than I am about you," Claire said, Fear is for later. Something shifted almost imperceptibly in his expression. Lead the way, he said. The ICU was quiet at that hour. The charge nurse, a 20-year veteran named Brenda, who had seen everything and was afraid of nothing, raised an eyebrow when Claire brought Morelli through. Family, Brenda said. Close enough, Claire said, and kept moving. Victoria was awake. Barely but awake, the particular half-consciousness of someone whose body was doing the enormous work of healing and couldn't spare much energy for the rest of it. Her eyes tracked to the door when it opened. When she saw Adrian Morelli, she made a sound that Claire had not anticipated. It was small, exhausted, like the sound of something very heavy being put down after a very long time of carrying it. Morelli crossed the room and stood at the bedside. He looked down at her, the bruised face, the splinted arm, the monitoring leads attached to her chest, and his jaw moved in a way that said something his face was refusing to show. Vicky. His voice was different, lower, something personal in it. You came, Victoria said. Of course I came. I wasn't sure the message would reach you. It reached me. He looked at Claire briefly. The doctor made sure of that. Victoria's eyes moved to Claire. Something in them that might, under different circumstances, have been warmth. She found everything, Victoria said. The fractures, the records. I know. Then you know we don't have much time. Victoria's voice gained strength from somewhere the same place Claire thought that people found strength when the thing they'd been holding together for months finally had a framework to support it. Calloway will figure out where I am by morning. He has someone watching the hospital system. When my name processes through insurance, his people will flag it. Morelli nodded. I know. I have 4 people outside already. That's not enough. It's enough for tonight. Victoria looked at him. You need the documents. I have them. They're not here. I couldn't carry them without risk. But they're in a location only you and I know about. If something happens to me before, nothing is going to happen to you. Adrian. Victoria's voice was firm despite everything. We are past the point of reassurances. We need a plan. Morelli was quiet for a moment. Then he turned to look at Claire. And Claire realized with a clarity that was almost physical that she was not standing at the edge of this situation anymore. She was in the middle of it. How much of this did she tell you? He asked. Enough, Claire said. Then you understand why I need to ask you something. Ask. The physician she mentioned, the one connected to this hospital. He paused. Dr. Reeves. Something cold moved through Claire's chest. What about him? He doesn't know she's here yet. When he finds out, and he will find out probably by morning, he will report to Calloway. We need to know the moment that communication happens. Morelli's eyes were direct, completely serious. You have access to this hospital's systems that I don't. You want me to monitor a colleague. I want you to protect your patient. His voice was even. Which is what you were already doing when you sent me that message. Claire looked at him for a long moment. She thought about Victoria's arm, the old fractures, the healed damage, the 14 months of pain that the official record said had never existed. She thought about Dr. Reeves, who remembered everyone's birthday. I need you to understand something, Claire said. I am not your operative. I'm not an asset. I am a physician, and this is my hospital, and I will not do anything that puts my patients or my staff at risk. Understood. And if at any point you use information or access I provide in a way that results in harm to anyone in this building, I will go directly to the FBI and tell them everything I know, starting with the fact that you were here tonight. Morelli's expression didn't change. Also understood. Then yes, Claire said. I'll watch for it. She turned back to Victoria. You need to rest. Your body has been through significant trauma, and the next 24 hours are critical for your recovery. Whatever else is happening, whatever you two need to plan, it needs to happen around your body's needs, not instead of them. Victoria almost smiled again. This time it made it a little further. She talks to you like that too, she said to Morelli. Morelli looked at Claire. For just a moment, something moved in his expression that wasn't calculation and wasn't fear, and wasn't the controlled composure of a powerful man managing a difficult situation. It was something much simpler. "Yes," he said. "She does." At 3 in the morning, Claire sat in the break room with a cup of coffee that had gone cold and her phone on the table in front of her, and thought about the shape of the thing she had walked into. Richard Calloway, a city council member and businessman who had been breaking a woman's bones for over a year, who had money and reach and the kind of embedded influence that could make a police report disappear before the ink dried. Adrian Morelli, a crime figure who operated behind a legitimate empire, who had come to a hospital at midnight looking terrified in a way he was trying hard to hide, whose relationship to the woman in the ICU was something Claire hadn't fully asked about but suspected was complicated in ways that the clinical report wouldn't capture, and herself, 32 years old, emergency physician, now apparently monitoring a colleague for evidence of corruption while housing a protected witness in her ICU, and maintaining an off-the-books communication channel with a man who federal prosecutors had been trying to indict for 9 years. She picked up the cold coffee and drank it. Then she pulled Victoria's chart and started documenting the actual injuries. The real documentation, not the sanitized version. The old fractures properly dated by their healing stage. The bruising pattern inconsistent with the vehicle accident. All of it in precise clinical language in the official record, under Claire Bennett's name and credentials. If Dr. Reeves or anyone else wanted to erase this, they would have to go through her. She pressed save. Then she stood up, straightened her white coat, and went back out to the floor. Because the emergency room did not stop, and there were still people who needed her, and she had made a decision that she intended to stand behind, whatever came next. The morning arrived the way bad news always did. Quietly, without warning, disguised as something ordinary. Claire had managed 2 hours of sleep on the break room couch. Not real sleep, the kind where your body shuts down from exhaustion, but your mind keeps running, processing, rehearsing scenarios and their outcomes. She woke up at 5:47 with her neck aching and her phone showing no new messages, which was either good news or the calm before something she wasn't ready for. She washed her face in the break room sink, changed into the spare scrubs she kept in her locker, and was back on the floor by 6. The night shift was handing over to days. The particular choreography of shift change charts being transferred, orders being reviewed. The outgoing nurses giving their incoming counterparts the real version of every patient's night, not just the documented one. Claire moved through it like she always did, checking in on her patients from the night before, updating herself on anything that had developed while she was horizontal on that break room couch, pretending to sleep. She saved the ICU for last. Victoria was awake. More awake than the night before, her eyes clearer, her color slightly better, despite the bruising, her body already beginning the remarkable work of repairing itself. She was looking at the ceiling when Claire came in, and she turned her head toward the door with the reflexive alertness of someone who had spent a long time needing to know who was entering a room. When she saw it was Claire, something in her shoulders released. "You stayed," Victoria said. "I work here." Claire checked the monitors. Blood pressure had stabilized overnight. Fluid balance looked reasonable. The fracture in her radius was holding in the temporary splint. "How's the pain?" "Manageable." Scale of 1 to 10. Victoria looked at her. "Does it matter?" "It matters to me." Claire met her eyes. "And it matters for your chart." A pause. 6. "I'll adjust the order." Claire made a note. "You should have told the night nurse." "The night nurse asked me twice if I needed anything, and both times I said no." Victoria's voice was even. "Old habit." Claire understood what that meant without needing it explained. When someone had spent over a year in a situation where expressing pain had consequences, the instinct to minimize it didn't switch off just because the circumstances changed. "You're not in that situation anymore," Claire said quietly. Victoria looked at her for a moment. "Aren't I?" It wasn't self-pity. It was a genuine question from someone who had learned to be very precise about the nature of their circumstances. "For as long as you're in this hospital," Claire said, "the only thing you need to worry about is healing. Everything else is being handled." By Morelli. By Morelli. Claire finished her notes. He was here until 4 in the morning. He left 2 people in the corridor outside this unit. Victoria was quiet for a moment. How did he seem to you? The question surprised Claire slightly. She considered it honestly. Controlled, she said. Very controlled. But underneath that worried. Not about the situation, about you specifically. Victoria looked back at the ceiling. We have a complicated history, she said. He and I. You don't have to explain anything to me. No. A pause. But I want you to understand something. Adrian Morelli is not the person the newspapers describe. That doesn't mean he's a good man in the simple sense of the word. It means he's a complicated one. The things he's done, some of them I can't defend. But the reason I trusted him with my life is because in 14 months of knowing Richard Calloway, I learned what genuine cruelty looked like. And Adrian Morelli is not that. Claire absorbed that. What is he? Victoria considered. Someone who made choices a long time ago that closed certain doors, and has been living inside those closed rooms ever since, occasionally forgetting there was ever anything outside them. It was a precise description, clinical in its way. Get some rest, Claire said. I'll check back in 2 hours. She was at the ICU door when Victoria spoke again. Dr. Bennett? Claire turned. Thank you for not treating me like a problem to be managed. Claire nodded once. Then she went back to work. Dr. Reeves arrived at 7:15. Claire knew because she was watching for it, not overtly, not in a way that anyone would notice, but she had positioned herself with a clear sightline to the elevator bank that served the attending physician parking level, and she clocked him the moment he stepped off. David Reeves was 61 years old, gray-haired with the kind of comfortable authority that came from decades of institutional seniority. He greeted 2 nurses by name in the corridor. He stopped at the station to check messages. He moved through the morning with the unhurried ease of a man who believed himself completely safe in his environment. Claire watched him access the overnight admissions log. She watched his eyes move down the list. She watched the exact moment he found the name. It was small, the change. Most people would have missed it. A slight stilling of his expression. A pause that lasted perhaps a half-second longer than the natural rhythm of reading. His hand holding his coffee cup didn't move. Then he kept scrolling, continued to the next name on the list, set the tablet down and exchanged a pleasantry with the charge nurse about the weather, and walked toward the physician's lounge. Claire gave him 90 seconds. Then she followed. The lounge was empty, except for Reeves, who was standing near the window with his back to the door and his phone to his ear. He heard her come in. She didn't try to be quiet and turned. His expression shifted, resettled, professional courtesy. Claire, early start. Overnight, she said. She moved toward the coffee machine because it gave her a reason to be in the room. You, the usual. He was watching her with eyes that were careful without looking careful. Busy night. One significant trauma. Multi-vehicle collision on Storo. She poured coffee. You see the admissions log. Just now. His voice was neutral. Victoria Hayes. That's an interesting name. Interesting how? A pause. Just slightly too long. I may have seen her at the Westfield Clinic. Can't be certain without pulling the record. He was still looking at her steadily. How is she? Stable. Claire turned from the coffee machine and met his eyes directly. Though her presenting injuries were unusual, the fracture pattern doesn't match the accident report. Reeves looked at her. Is that so? I've documented everything in the chart, Claire said. Full clinical notation. The attending of record is me. Something moved behind Reeves's eyes. Not quite fear. Something more calculating than fear. That must have been a long night for you, he said. It was. Claire held his gaze. But thorough documentation is important, especially in cases with unusual presentations. You agree? The silence between them had weight. Of course, Reeves said. Claire picked up her coffee. I'll let you get to your morning. She was almost to the door when he said Claire. She turned. Reeves looked at her with an expression she couldn't completely read, something between warning and something else. something that might in different circumstances have been close to regret. "Be careful," he said. "With cases like this, the paperwork gets complicated." "I appreciate the concern," Claire said. She walked out of the lounge. Her hands were steady. She was proud of that. Her heart was doing something considerably less steady, but that was what the walk back to the nurse's station was for putting distance between her reaction and the place where she needed to function. She picked up her phone and typed a single line to the number that had replied, "On my way 8 hours ago." "He knows. Made a call. You have maybe 4 hours." The response came back in under a minute. "Understood. Don't be alone." Adrian Morelli arrived back at Hargrove at 8:45, and this time, he didn't try to be quiet about it. He came through the main entrance with two men Claire hadn't seen before, both large, both dressed in a way that said private security rather than crime. Though she understood the distinction was mostly aesthetic, and he went directly to the desk and asked for Dr. Bennett by name. When she came to meet him, he looked at her with something that was almost direct. "Walk with me," he said. It wasn't a request, but it wasn't quite an order either. It was the tone of someone who had learned that most people responded better to the appearance of invitation. Claire fell into step beside him. The two men stayed back close enough to be useful, far enough to create the illusion of privacy. "Reeves made contact with Calloway's office at 7:22, Morelli said, keeping his voice low and his eyes forward. "Through a third-party relay. He confirmed Victoria's location and condition. He also flagged your name." Claire absorbed that. "How do you know the exact time?" "Because I've been monitoring Calloway's communications for 8 months. He glanced at her. "I was closer to having enough. Victoria's evidence would have completed the picture. Calloway moving against her accelerated the timeline." "What does flagging my name mean?" "It means Calloway now knows there's a physician who documented the real injuries and is not going to be moved. You become part of his problem." Claire was quiet for a moment. They were moving down a corridor that led toward the administrative wing away from patient areas. "What kind of problem does Calloway make people into?" she asked. Morelli didn't answer immediately. "That's not a reassuring pause," Claire said. "He has 3 preferred methods," Morelli said. "Professional destruction licensing boards malpractice claims, planted evidence of negligence, personal pressure, family members' relationships, anything that creates leverage. And in cases where neither of those works quickly enough," he stopped. "Physical." "Has he used the third method before?" "Once that I can confirm. A paralegal who worked for an attorney building a case against him." "She had an accident." His jaw tightened slightly. "She survived. Barely." Claire processed that. She thought about her mother who called every Sunday. Her apartment on the 4th floor of a building with a doorman she'd known for 3 years. Her patients. The work she'd been doing for 6 years in this building that she had never once thought of as anything other than safe. "Okay," she said. Morelli looked at her. "Okay," he repeated. "I've heard the risk assessment. Now tell me what we do about it." He studied her for a moment. The same cataloging expression she'd seen the night before, something being measured, evaluated. "You are a very unusual person," he said. "I'm a physician who made a choice," Claire said. "The choice has consequences. I'd rather deal with the consequences than pretend the choice wasn't made. What's the plan?" The plan, as Morelli laid it out in the next 12 minutes, had several components. Victoria's location within the hospital needed to change. Reeves knew the ICU, which meant Calloway knew the ICU, which meant the ICU was now compromised as a secure location. Morelli's people would arrange a transfer to a private room in the cardiac recovery unit, listed under a different name in the system, with access restricted to Claire and 2 trusted nurses. Claire's movements outside the hospital needed to be monitored, not restricted. Morelli was careful to frame it that way, and Claire noticed, but monitored. He would have someone near her. The documentation she had created needed to be secured outside the hospital system. Copies to a location Calloway couldn't reach under encryption, that his people couldn't break in a short timeline. And Victoria's evidence, the documents she had referenced the night before, the financial records that would close the case against Calloway, needed to be retrieved from wherever she had hidden them. She told you where they are? Claire asked. She told me enough. I need to get someone there today before Calloway's people start looking. Is that likely? It's possible. He doesn't know what she has. But a man like Calloway, when he feels threatened, tends to be thorough. A pause. It's one of his worst qualities. Claire noticed the word worse, as though thorough wasn't inherently a bad quality, as though it was the application that made it so. She filed that away. One more thing, Morelli said. Tell me. Reeves. He's a complication we have to manage carefully. He's useful to Calloway as long as he's credible. If his credibility collapses, Calloway loses his inside connection here. He looked at her directly. But if we move against him too quickly before we have everything we need, Calloway gets spooked and disappears into his legal team for the next 18 months. The case goes cold. So we leave Reeves in place. For now. And he continues to have access to my hospital and my patients. Morelli met her eyes. For 72 hours. Possibly less. I need you to trust me on the timeline. I need you to understand, Claire said, that if Reeves takes any action that endangers a patient in this building during those 72 hours, the timeline becomes irrelevant, and I will act regardless of what it costs your case. I know. I mean it. I know you do. He said it simply. Not as flattery, not as management. As a statement of fact. That's why I'm telling you the truth, instead of a more convenient version of it. Claire looked at him for a moment. There was something strange about standing in a hospital corridor having this conversation with this person. Something that her life up until 36 hours ago had provided absolutely no framework for. And yet the conversation felt oddly rational. Oddly real. All right, she said. 72 hours, but I want daily briefings, real ones. You'll have them. And if the timeline changes for any reason, I hear it from you first, not from consequences. Agreed. She nodded. Let's go check on your patient. Victoria took the transfer without complaint, which told Claire something about how accustomed she had become to moving on short notice. The nursing staff who helped with the transfer, 2 women Claire had worked with for years and trusted completely, were told only that the patient required enhanced privacy for security reasons. They didn't ask more. Emergency medicine attracted a particular kind of professional, and one of the unspoken competencies of that world was knowing which questions didn't need to be asked right now. The new room was smaller, quieter, further from the main corridors. When the nurses had gone, Morelli sat in the chair beside Victoria's bed, with his elbows on his knees and his hands loosely linked, and the body language was so different from the controlled authority he wore in the corridor that Claire, standing near the window to give them what space she could, was almost startled by it. The Meridian documents, he said to Victoria quietly. Richardson has them. The secondary set, yes. Victoria's voice was low. The originals are in the safety deposit box at the Federal Street branch. But the secondary copies, the ones with the account routing numbers and the wire confirmation, those are with Richardson. I'll have someone there by noon. Make sure it's not Doyle. Victoria looked at him steadily. I don't trust Doyle. Something crossed Morelli's face. Doyle's been with me for... I know how long Doyle's been with you. Victoria's voice was quiet but firm. That doesn't change what I'm telling you. A pause. You have a reason, Morelli said. I have a very specific reason that I'll explain when we have more time and I have more energy. She shifted against the pillow, and the movement cost her a brief tightening around her eyes that she suppressed quickly. Not Doyle. Send Marcus. Marcus is in New York until Thursday. Call him back. Morelli was quiet for a moment. He looked at Victoria, the real look, not the managed one. And Claire saw something that she had not anticipated seeing in the face of the man that newspapers called ruthless. She saw someone who was genuinely afraid of losing the person in front of him. Not the evidence she carried. Not the strategic advantage she represented. Her. I'll call Marcus, he said. Victoria closed her eyes briefly. Good. Then she opened them and looked at Claire. I owe you an explanation, Victoria said, about Adrian and me. You don't owe me anything, Claire said. I want to give you one anyway, because you're in this now and you deserve to understand the full picture. Victoria took a breath. 3 years ago, I was a financial investigator. Private sector working for a firm that handled due diligence for corporate mergers. I was assigned to a transaction that involved one of Adrian's holding companies. Claire noticed it had gone very still. I found irregularities, Victoria continued. Not in the holding company itself, in the counterparty. The company Adrian was acquiring had been used as a shell by Richard Calloway to move money from fraudulent construction contracts. When I flagged it, my firm tried to bury my report. Calloway had already gotten to someone at the senior level. She paused. I went to Adrian directly. Why him? Claire asked. If the irregularities involved his transaction. Because the irregularities showed that Calloway had deceived him. Had used the transaction to make Morelli's company appear to be complicit in the fraud. It was a setup. Adrian was going to take the legal exposure while Calloway walked away clean. Victoria's eyes moved to Morelli. I brought him the evidence. And instead of burying it, Claire said slowly, he pulled out of the transaction, took a significant financial loss to do it cleanly. Victoria's voice was steady, and started looking into Calloway. Which is when Calloway noticed, Claire said. Which is when Calloway noticed. And decided that the most effective way to control the situation was to get close to me. Victoria's voice flattened. I was moved to a different case. Calloway approached me professionally. By the time I understood what was happening, I was inside a situation I couldn't get out of without evidence of what he was doing. Because without evidence, Calloway would have destroyed her professionally before she could say a word, Morelli said quietly. He had already planted the groundwork, made it look like her original report was fabricated, that she had a conflict of interest. He's thorough, Victoria said. And in those 2 words was everything 14 months of careful, systematic destruction wrapped in the same word Morelli had used 20 minutes ago. Claire stood there and felt the shape of it settle over her. Not abstractly. In the particular specific physical way that certain truths settled with weight, with texture, with the understanding that some things were worse than you had made room for in your imagination. He got to your family, Claire asked Victoria. My sister, Victoria said. He made it clear that my sister's life would become very difficult if I moved against him without enough evidence to make it stick. A pause. So I waited, and gathered, and endured. The word endured sat in the room. Claire didn't look away from her. You're not enduring anymore, Claire said. It was a simple statement. She meant it simply. Victoria looked at her for a long moment. No, she said. I suppose I'm not. At 10:47, Claire's pager went off. Not unusual, it went off dozens of times a day. But this page came from a number she recognized as the hospital administrator's office, and the code beside it was the one that indicated she was being summoned, not simply informed. She excused herself from the room and took the stairs down to the administrative level, running through possibilities. It could be anything: a complaint, a scheduling issue, a routine matter that happened to fall on an already complicated day. It was not a routine matter. Hargrove's chief medical officer, Dr. Franklin Wells, was a man Claire respected and had always found direct. He was direct now. He was also, she noticed, immediately uncomfortable. There was another person in the room, a man she didn't recognize, mid-40s, a suit that was very good. The particular quality of stillness that people had when they were paid to present themselves as unthreatening while being quite the opposite. Claire, Wells said, "Thank you for coming down. This is Mr. Henning. He represents a client who has an interest in one of your current patients." "Victoria Hayes," Claire said. Henning smiled. It was technically a smile. "Ms. Hayes is a client of my firm," he said. "We handle her legal affairs. We've been concerned about her welfare since the accident, and we're hoping to get an update on her condition and arrange for her to be moved to a private facility where we can ensure she receives appropriate care." The language was perfect, smooth, institutional, plausible. Claire looked at him. "Ms. Hayes's medical decisions are hers to make," Claire said. "When she's in a condition to receive visitors, she's welcome to speak with her legal representative." "Of course." Henning's smile didn't waver. "We simply want to ensure she has access to the highest level of—" "She has access to excellent care here," Claire said. if she chooses to involve her legal team in her discharge planning. That conversation will happen through the hospital's patient liaison office in accordance with our standard protocols. A pause. I understand, Henning said. Perhaps I could at least confirm to my client that Ms. Hayes is being held in the ICU. Patient location and condition are confidential, Claire said. HIPAA applies to everyone regardless of their professional role. If your firm has standing to access her medical information, I'm sure your office can navigate the appropriate legal request channels. She looked at Wells. Is there anything else you needed from me, Dr. Wells? Wells looked at her. He was reading something. Reading the situation the way a careful man did when he knew there were things happening around him that hadn't been explained. No, he said. Thank you, Claire. She nodded to both of them. She was halfway to the elevator when she heard Henning say behind her to Wells, "Cooperative staff, you must be proud." The elevator doors opened. Claire stepped in. Her hands were steady. She sent a text before the doors had closed. Calloway sent a lawyer. Tried to get location and condition. I gave him nothing. He'll try another way. Morelli's response took 45 seconds. He already did. Someone accessed the hospital record system from an external terminal at 10:31. The access was logged under Reeves's credentials. Claire stared at her phone. But Reeves was in clinic from 9 to 11. Exactly. She understood immediately. Someone had used Reeves's credentials, either with his knowledge or without it, to access the system, while Reeves was physically somewhere he could claim as an alibi. Can you trace the terminal? Already working on it. Claire. She waited. Stay visible. Stay in public areas of the hospital. Don't go anywhere in the building alone. She looked at the elevator doors as they opened on her floor. The corridor was ordinary. Nurses at the station. An orderly with a cart. The ambient sounds of a hospital doing its work. Ordinary. She stepped out of the elevator. Her phone buzzed one more time. Not Morelli this time. A number she didn't recognize. The text had 4 words. We need to talk. And then after a pause of perhaps 3 seconds, a second message from the same unknown number. About what you found in that chart. About why you should stop. Claire stood in the corridor with her phone in her hand and the ambient noise of the hospital around her and the 4 words on her screen. She read them once. Then she typed back. Who is this? The reply came immediately. Someone who doesn't want you to get hurt. Someone who knows what Richard Calloway does to people who don't stop. And then the messages stopped. The number, when she tried to call it back, rang twice and went to a generic voicemail. She stood there for a moment longer. Then she forwarded the entire exchange to Morelli, put her phone in her pocket, and went to check on her patients. Because that was what she did. That was who she was. And whatever was coming, she intended to meet it standing exactly where she belonged. Morelli called her back within 4 minutes of receiving the forwarded messages. No greeting. No preamble. Where are you right now? Nurse's station on the cardiac recovery floor. Claire kept her voice low and even. In plain sight. Like you said. Good. Stay there. A pause, the kind that meant he was doing something else, simultaneously processing multiple threads at once. The number that texted you is a burner. Purchased 3 days ago in cash at a convenience store in Charlestown. We can't trace the buyer. 3 days ago, Claire repeated. Before the accident. Yes, she absorbed that. So whoever sent that message knew this situation was developing before Victoria came into my ER. That's what it means. His voice was controlled, but she was getting better at hearing what was underneath it. Right now, underneath it was something sharp and focused. Claire, someone on the inside of this, someone who knows enough to have been watching this for days, just tried to warn you off. That's either Calloway trying to scare you, or it's someone who's been watching Calloway and doesn't want you caught in the crossfire. Which do you think it is? A beat. I don't know yet, and I don't like not knowing. He paused again. Marcus lands at Logan at 2. He'll go directly to Richardson for the documents. Once we have those in hand, we have enough to move. I need you to keep Reeves in your peripheral vision without making him feel watched. Can you do that? I've been doing it all morning. I know, you're doing it well. A pause that was slightly different from the others, shorter, less calculated. "Are you all right?" The question surprised her. Not because it was unexpected from a human being, but because it was unexpected from him, from the version of him she was still assembling in her mind. "I'm functioning," she said. "That's not what I asked." She was quiet for a moment. Around her, the nurse's station moved through its morning and ordinary time charts and medications, and the particular rhythm of care that she knew so well, it had become part of her own breathing. "No," she said honestly. "I'm not entirely all right, but I'm not going to fall apart if that's what you need to know." "That's not what I needed to know." His voice was quiet. "I needed to know whether you were honest enough to tell me when something was wrong." She didn't know what to do with that, so she moved past it. 2 o'clock for Marcus," she said. "What do you need from me between now and then? Watch, document, and Claire if Reeves approaches you again, or if anyone else from outside this hospital tries to make contact about Victoria, I need to know within 2 minutes." "Understood." She hung up and stood at the station for a moment, breathing deliberately. Then she picked up the nearest chart and went back to work, because work was the thing that made sense when everything else was strange. At 11:15, Dr. Reeves found her. She was reviewing post-op labs in the corridor when she heard his footsteps. She had already, without intending to memorize the sound of his particular gait, and she looked up from the tablet with an expression she had spent the last 2 hours practicing. Neutral, professional, slightly distracted by the work in her hands. "Claire." He fell into step beside her, which was natural enough. Physicians moved and talked simultaneously as a baseline mode of existence. "I wanted to check in about the Hayes patient, given the unusual presentation you mentioned." "She's stable," Claire said. She kept walking, resting comfortably. "I pulled the chart this morning." He said it carefully, watching her from the side. "Did you?" She didn't slow her pace. "Your documentation is very thorough." A pause. "The fracture notation, the staging on the older injuries. You're confident in that assessment." "I'm confident in what the physical evidence shows," Claire said. "Whether the interpretation of that evidence is medically or legally significant is above my pay grade. I document what I find, of course." Reeves was quiet for 3 steps. "I only ask because a case like this with this kind of documentation on file, it tends to generate attention. Licensing board attention. The kind of attention that can be difficult for a physician, especially one at your career stage." Claire stopped walking. She turned and looked at Reeves with an expression that she didn't have to practice. "Dr. Reeves," she said, "are you suggesting that I alter my clinical documentation?" "I'm suggesting that a young physician with a bright future might want to be certain before making claims that could." "Because if that's what you're suggesting," Claire said, and her voice was completely level, "I need you to understand that I am going to document this conversation as well. The time, the location, and the content. And if anyone suggests, formally or informally, that my clinical record of a patient's injuries should be changed, I will report that to the Medical Ethics Board before the end of the business day." Reeves looked at her. His expression was doing something complicated. Something that moved through several phases: calculation, reassessment, and then beneath it all, something that looked almost like the recognition of a situation that had gone beyond his ability to manage. "I was only trying to offer guidance," he said, collegially. "I appreciate collegial guidance," Claire said. "Is there anything else?" A long pause. "No," he said. "That's all." She turned and continued walking. She made it around the corner before she exhaled. Her phone was in her hand before she'd taken 3 more steps. "Reeves just tried to pressure me to change the documentation." Directly. In the corridor. Morelli's response was immediate. Exact words. She typed them out from memory, which was sharp right now, in the way that everything was sharp, the particular clarity of sustained adrenaline. His response took longer this time. 40 seconds. "That's it. He's panicking. A panicking man makes mistakes." "Claire, I need you to do something." She waited. "Go back to him in 20 minutes. Not confrontational. Apologetic. Tell him you may have overreacted and you're open to his guidance. Make him think you're reconsidering." She stared at the message. Then she typed back, You want me to lie to him. I want you to buy us 12 more hours. Marcus has the documents by 6 tonight. Once we have them, Reeves becomes irrelevant, and Calloway loses his inside man. But if Reeves panics and runs to Calloway right now, Calloway moves against Victoria before we're ready. She read it twice. She thought about Victoria's hand on her arm in the emergency bay. I know what I'm asking you to step into. She thought about 14 months of healed fractures written out of the official record. Fine, she typed. But if I have to say anything that could be construed as agreeing to falsify documentation, I'm pulling back. Understood. Completely understood. She found Reeves in the physician's lounge at 11:40, the same room where she'd watched him make his phone call that morning. He was sitting with a cup of coffee and a medical journal he was not reading. She sat down across from him. He looked up. I owe you an apology, Claire said. She kept her voice quiet, slightly strained the way a person sounded when they were backing down from something they hadn't entirely made peace with. I think I overreacted earlier. It's been a long shift, and I'm running on 2 hours of sleep, and I took something professionally that you probably meant as, no. Reeves set the journal down. His relief was visible not dramatically, but the slight easing of tension around his eyes was unmistakable. I phrased it badly. I only meant to offer the perspective of experience. Cases with this kind of complexity can create professional exposure that younger attendings sometimes don't anticipate. I understand that, Claire said. She nodded slowly. And I value the guidance. I need to think about the right approach. How to balance the documentation requirements with the larger context of the case. Of course, take the time you need. He was watching her with something that might have been warmth if she hadn't known what it was covering. There's no rush on final determinations. Medicine is iterative. It is. She stood. Thank you, David. The use of his first name was deliberate. She saw it land. Of course, he said. Anytime. She walked out of the lounge and went directly to the restroom and stood at the sink for 60 seconds, running cold water over her wrists and looking at herself in the mirror. Then she dried her hands and sent Morelli the word, done. His response. He just texted Calloway's intermediary. You gave him exactly what we needed. He told them, you're wavering. Calloway will hold off moving against Victoria for at least 12 hours while he waits to see if the documentation gets changed. Then, you did well. She put her phone away and didn't let herself feel anything about any of it until much later. The afternoon moved in the taut particular way that time moved when you were waiting for something to break. Claire saw her scheduled patients. She reviewed charts. She attended a brief trauma team meeting that lasted 40 minutes, and during which she contributed 3 clinically sound observations and remembered none of them afterward. At 1:15, she went to check on Victoria. Morelli was there. He'd come back in through a side entrance. She'd gotten a text warning her and was sitting in the chair beside Victoria's bed, in that same posture she'd noticed before. The one that was different from his public self. Less composed, more real. Victoria was more alert than the morning. The pain management adjustment Claire had made was working. She was sitting up against the pillows with the careful economy of movement of someone who had learned to protect their ribs, and she and Morelli were in the middle of a quiet conversation that they didn't interrupt when Claire came in, which Claire took as a sign of trust she hadn't entirely expected. Richardson confirmed, Morelli was saying. Marcus is on his way to him now. The secondary copies include the wire routing, Victoria said. Every transaction, every date, every amount. It connects Calloway's accounts directly to the shell company. There's no interpretation required, it's a straight line. Combined with what I already have from the 8 months of monitoring it, gives us enough for federal prosecution. Not just indictment conviction. Morelli's voice was careful. But the timing has to be precise. We can't present it piecemeal. Calloway's legal team is exceptional. If they have any window to challenge the chain of custody, they won't. Victoria looked at him. I was thorough. I know you were. Claire checked Victoria's vitals and adjusted the monitoring while they talked, moving quietly, listening in the way that a doctor listened, absorbing information that might matter later. There's something else, Victoria said. She looked at Claire, including her deliberately. Something I didn't tell you last night because I wasn't certain, but I've been thinking about it since this morning, and I think you both need to know. Morelli straightened slightly. Tell me. The person who embedded someone near your operation, who told Calloway every time I tried to make contact with you. Victoria paused. I think I know who it is. The room was very quiet. Who? Morelli's voice was even. Precisely even. The way a voice got when the emotion under it was something that required very careful containment. His name is Doyle, Victoria said. Thomas Doyle. She'd said it the night before, not Doyle. Send Marcus. Claire had registered it without fully understanding it. Now she watched Morelli's face. It was extraordinary, the stillness that moved over him. Not anger. Not shock. Something deeper and colder than both of those, the kind of expression that a person made when something they'd been afraid to believe was confirmed. How long, he said. I don't know exactly. But the first time I tried to reach your organization 14 months ago through a contact I thought was secure, Calloway knew about it within 36 hours. Victoria held his gaze. Doyle was the only person at your level who had access to that contact. Doyle has been with me for 16 years. I know. Victoria's voice was very gentle for what it was carrying. I know what that means. Morelli stood up from the chair. He moved to the window, not pacing, not restless, but needing the physical act of moving. He stood there with his back to both of them. Claire glanced at Victoria. Victoria gave the smallest shake of her head. Not yet. 30 seconds passed. Is there evidence? Morelli said. His voice came from the window. Not documented evidence, not yet. Victoria paused. But there's a pattern. Every contact attempt I made through your channels, every time I came close to getting the information out. Calloway moved within a day or two. Always. And the only consistent variable was that Doyle had access to your internal scheduling. Another silence. I sent Doyle to New York 3 days ago, Morelli said quietly. Told him I needed him to manage a business matter. He's there right now. I know, Victoria said. That's why I said send Marcus. Morelli turned from the window. His face had closed again. The composure was back, but it was wearing differently now. Something had shifted behind his eyes. The way something shifted when a long-held structure was rearranged. 16 years, he said again. Not to either of them. To himself. People are complicated, Claire said. She hadn't planned to say anything, but she was a physician, and she had learned that sometimes the clinical observation was also the human one. Loyalty and betrayal aren't always opposites. Sometimes they exist in the same person at different times. Morelli looked at her. That is either the most compassionate thing I've heard today, or the most naive, he said. It might be both, Claire said. Something moved in his expression that was not quite a smile, but occupied a similar space. Marcus cannot know about Doyle until we have the documents secured, Morelli said. If word gets back to New York before Marcus has what we need, Doyle will make the documents disappear, Victoria finished. I know. That's why I waited until Marcus was already in transit to tell you. Morelli looked at her. You could have told me last night. Last night you would have acted on it immediately. Victoria met his gaze steadily. You would have called Doyle, and the conversation would have told him everything. I needed you to wait until it was too late to be rash. A long silence. You managed me, Morelli said. I protected the outcome, Victoria said. He looked at her for another moment. You're right, he said. I would have called him. At 2:47 Marcus called. Claire was not in this room when it happened, but she was in the corridor, and she heard Morelli's voice through the partially open door. Not the words, just the tone, the shift in it. She pushed the door open. Morelli was on his phone. His face was telling her something was wrong before she could ask. He held up one finger. She waited. How bad? He said into the phone. Then, how many? Then a silence that lasted 20 seconds during which he was very still. Get out. Don't take the documents. Get out right now and call me when you're clear. He lowered the phone. Victoria was watching him. Marcus. Richardson's office was turned over, Morelli said. Someone got there first, an hour ahead of Marcus. He paused. The documents are gone. The room went quiet in a particular way. Doyle, Victoria said. Her voice was flat. Has to be. I told no one else about Richardson except Marcus, and Marcus was in the air. Morelli's jaw tightened. Doyle must have known about Richardson independently. He's been monitoring longer than we thought. Then Calloway has the secondary documents. Yes. Victoria closed her eyes. Something moved across her face, not defeat, but the expression of a person recalibrating in real time, running through contingencies with the efficiency of someone who had done it many times. The originals, she said after a moment. Federal Street. Calloway doesn't know about those. I never told Richardson about the originals. Can you access them? Morelli asked. Given your current, not me. She opened her eyes. But I can authorize someone else. Someone whose name isn't connected to mine in any system Calloway has access to. Both of them looked at Claire. Claire felt the look arrive before she fully processed it. No, it not, Morelli said immediately. He looked back at Victoria. Absolutely not. She's already in this, Victoria said. There's a difference between being in it from this hospital and walking into a bank branch connected to a murder investigation. It's not a murder investigation. Not yet. The words fell into the room. Victoria looked at Claire. I won't ask you to do this, Victoria said. It's too much to ask of someone who came into this because of a patient intake. Adrian is right. It's... What do I need to do? Claire said. Both of them looked at her. Claire, Morelli started. I heard you, she said. Both of you. I understand the risks. She looked at Victoria. You waited 14 months, endured things that most people would not have survived. And the evidence you collected during those 14 months is sitting in a box on Federal Street, and you have one window to get it out before Calloway figures out it exists. She paused. Tell me what I need to do. Victoria looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked at Morelli. Something passed between them. The particular communication of people who had known each other long enough to have entire conversations in a glance. Morelli looked at Claire. I don't like this, he said. I know. If anything, tell me what I need to do. Another silence. The kind where a decision gets made. Victoria reached for the notepad on the bedside table with her good arm and wrote 4 things: an address, a box number, an authorization code, and a name. The branch manager's name is Paulson, Victoria said. He knows me. He doesn't know the details of the account, but he'll recognize the authorization code. You present the code, he gives you access. She handed Claire the notepad. There are 2 envelopes inside the box. Bring both. Don't open them. What if Calloway's people are watching the branch? Claire asked. They're not, Morelli said. Not yet. That's why we have to move in the next 2 hours. He paused. I'll have 2 people outside. Not inside would flag, but outside. If anything looks wrong when you arrive, you do not go in. You walk past and call me. Understood. Understood. Claire. His voice was serious in a way that was different from his usual serious. More direct, less managed. You walk away from this if it feels wrong. The evidence matters. You matter more. She looked at him. She wasn't sure what she expected to feel when he said that. She felt something, but she filed it away for later, for a time when there was room for it. I'll be back in 90 minutes, she said. She arranged coverage for her patients with a colleague citing a personal appointment and left the hospital at 3:15, wearing her street clothes and carrying nothing that identified her as a Hargrove physician. She took a cab, not a ride, share cash payment. Morelli's suggestion, and watched the city go past the window and thought about the woman in the cardiac recovery room who had grabbed her arm in an emergency bay and asked her to carry something. She had not expected to carry it this far, but she was beginning to understand that this was the nature of the thing Victoria had given her. Not a task, but a direction. The kind of direction that once you started moving in, its stopping felt like a betrayal of something larger than the decision itself. The Federal Street branch was a quiet, old-money institution. Warm wood low lighting the particular hush of a place where significant amounts of money were stored, and no one raised their voice. She walked in. A man at the welcome desk looked up with the professional warmth of someone trained to make wealthy clients comfortable. "I'm here to access a safe deposit box," Claire said. "Box 1147. I have authorization." "Of course." He stood. "Name for the authorization." "The code is sufficient." Claire said exactly as Victoria had told her. "Protocol 11-7. A pause. He looked at her carefully. One moment. He disappeared and returned with an older man, Paulson. She assumed gray-haired and precise, the branch manager's authority in every movement. Paulson looked at her. At the code she showed him on the notepad. "Ms. Hayes's associate," he said quietly. "Yes." He looked at her for another moment, the careful measurement of a man who handled other people's secrets and understood the responsibility of that. "Follow me," he said. She was inside the branch for 11 minutes. She walked out with 2 sealed envelopes in her bag, and her hands steady, and her heart doing something considerably more complicated. Morelli's man, she spotted him after half a block, standing near a parked car, with the particular quality of stillness that said professional, gave her a slight nod. She kept walking. She was 1 block from the branch when her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered. Dr. Bennett. The voice was male, measured. The same quality of professional calm that she associated with people who did things for money and were very good at them. "You just left the Federal Street First National Branch. You're carrying 2 envelopes that belong to my employer." Her steps didn't slow. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said. "Of course you do." A pause. "Dr. Bennett, you are a physician with a promising career and no criminal record. You treated a patient and got involved in something that was never meant to include you. My employer understands that. He bears you no ill will." "That's very generous," Claire said. "He'd like the envelopes returned. All of this goes away. Victoria Hayes receives proper care. You return to your hospital. No consequences for anyone." She could see the cab stand at the corner ahead, 40 feet. "Tell your employer," Claire said, "that I'm a physician and my clinical documentation stands." A pause. "Dr. Bennett." "We're done with this conversation." She hung up. She was at the cab stand in 30 seconds. She texted Morelli 3 words as the cab door closed. "I have them." His response arrived as the cab pulled into traffic. And then, 6 seconds after Morelli's message, another text came through. This one from the unknown number that had first warned her to stop. "They're watching you. Not just Calloway's people. Someone else. Someone inside Morelli's organization. Don't go back to the hospital. Don't trust anyone." She stared at the message. The cab moved through the afternoon traffic with the ordinary indifference of a city that didn't know what was riding through it. She read the message again. Don't trust anyone. She thought about Morelli, who had come to the hospital terrified for Victoria and stayed until 4 in the morning. She thought about Victoria, who had waited 14 months and endured what she'd endured and trusted Claire with the only thing that mattered. She thought about Doyle, who had been with Morelli for 16 years. She thought about Dr. Reeves, who remembered everyone's birthday. She looked at Morelli's message. "Coming to you. Stay in the cab." She made a decision. She called him directly. He picked up on the first ring. "Where are you?" he said. "In the cab heading back." She kept her voice completely level. "I just received another message from the unknown number. Adrian." The first time she'd used his name, it happened without planning. "Is there anyone in your organization other than Doyle that I should know about?" A silence. Longer than his silences usually were. "Why?" he said. "Because the message says there's someone watching me who isn't Calloway's people. Someone on your side." She paused. "And the fact that you just paused tells me that isn't completely impossible." Another silence. "Tell me exactly what the message said," he said. She read it to him. He was quiet for 4 seconds. "Claire," he said, "I need you to listen to me very carefully." "I'm listening." "The person sending those messages, I know who it is." She waited. "It's Doyle." The cab turned a corner. Afternoon light came through the window at an angle. "He's been trying to warn me," Morelli said. Not Calloway. The messages are from Doyle. But you said Doyle. I know what I said. His voice was tight, controlled. The kind of controlled that was holding something else in place. Victoria's theory about Doyle, it was wrong. The pattern she identified, the contact attempts that Calloway discovered, they weren't leaked by Doyle. Doyle was running a parallel investigation. He found Calloway's actual source inside my organization 3 weeks ago. And then Calloway found out Doyle knew. He stopped. Claire Doyle went to Richardson's office to protect the documents. He didn't take them. He moved them. She stared at the seat back in front of her. He moved them where? He sent them to a federal contact, a prosecutor he trusted. Morelli's voice dropped. Calloway's people arrived at Richardson's office looking for documents that were already gone. And Doyle has been trying to warn us that there's still a leak, a real one, and it's not him. The cab was 5 minutes from the hospital. Then who? Claire said. We're still working on that, Morelli said. Which is why I need you to come back through the side entrance. No main lobby. No elevator banks. Side entrance service corridor, up to the cardiac floor. Adrian. She said it again and again, it was without planning. Who inside your organization had access to both the Richardson contact and the hospital location? The silence this time was the longest one yet. One person, he said. Tell me. And he said a name she recognized, a name that reordered everything she thought she understood about the last 36 hours. The cab pulled up to the hospital. She paid in cash. She got out. And she walked toward the side entrance with 2 envelopes in her bag and the knowledge of a name that changed everything, moving through an ordinary afternoon, like a person who had not just felt the ground shift underneath her entire understanding of what was happening. Because the truth, the real truth, the one underneath the truth she'd believed had just arrived. And it was worse than the version she'd been carrying. The name Morelli said was Marcus. Claire stood outside the hospital's side entrance for 3 full seconds after he said it, the afternoon traffic moving around her with complete indifference to the fact that the name had just rearranged everything she'd understood for the past 36 hours. Marcus. The man Morelli had called back from New York. The man Victoria had trusted enough to specify by name. The man who was supposedly in transit right now to retrieve documents that Doyle had already moved. He's not on a plane, Morelli said. His voice had the quality of someone speaking through something very heavy. I checked the flight manifest 20 minutes ago. Marcus never boarded. He told my office he was at Logan. He was never at Logan. Where is he? That's what I'm working on. A pause. Claire, the 2 envelopes you're carrying. Yes. Marcus knows about them. He knows about the Federal Street branch. I told him this morning when I called him back from New York. Richardson, she said. And then when Doyle moved the documents, Marcus lost track of them. And then Doyle sent his warning to you because Doyle knew Marcus had been feeding you information, feeding us information, and couldn't figure out which direction the exposure was coming from. Morelli stopped. Claire, Marcus knows you went to Federal Street. I texted him your location when you left the hospital. That was 40 minutes ago. The afternoon around her was ordinary. A cab pulling away. Someone walking past with a coffee. The side entrance to the hospital 10 feet ahead. He could be here, she said. He could be anywhere. I don't know. His voice dropped. Get inside, right now. Service corridor, do not stop, go directly to Victoria's floor. She pushed through the side entrance. The service corridor was utilitarian. Concrete fluorescent, the back infrastructure of a building that presented warmth and care on its public face. She moved fast, not running. Running created attention, but the purposeful speed of a hospital worker who was late for something. She hit the stairwell and took it upward. I'm inside, she said quietly. Good, keep moving. She could hear Morelli moving too on his end, the ambient sounds of his location changing. I'm 12 minutes from the hospital. What do I do with the envelopes when I get upstairs? Give them to Victoria. She'll know what to do with them. A pause. And Claire, you don't know where you went this afternoon. If anyone asks anyone at all, you were running a personal errand, nothing specific. And if Marcus is already in the building? A silence that lasted 2 seconds and felt like considerably longer. He doesn't know your face well enough to move against you directly in a hospital, Morelli said. He'd need Calloway's people for that, and they can't get into a secured floor without flagging security. You're safer inside than out. He paused. Probably. Probably, she repeated. I'll be there in 12 minutes. She pushed through the door onto the cardiac recovery floor. The nurse's station was running its ordinary afternoon rhythm. She nodded to the day-charge nurse, a woman named Gail, who had been at Hargrove for 14 years and had a way of seeing everything without looking like she was watching anything, and kept moving toward Victoria's room. She knocked twice. No answer. She pushed the door open. The room was empty. The bed was disturbed, not dramatically, not violently, but in the way a bed looked when someone had gotten out of it under their own power. The monitoring leads were disconnected at the device end, not pulled from the skin, which meant it wasn't a struggle. Victoria had removed them herself deliberately. Claire checked the bathroom. Empty. She turned back to the room and did the fast, systematic scan she'd been trained to do in emergencies, looking for what was present and what was absent. The personal items that had been brought with Victoria were still there. Her phone on this bedside table was gone. She called Morelli. He picked up on the first ring. Victoria's not in the room, Claire said. She left on her own. Her phone is gone. A sharp silence. She's mobile, he said. After last night. She's determined. Claire looked at the disconnected leads. She didn't run. She chose to leave. The question is why. Give me a second. She heard him doing something on his end, typing, calling the compressed activity of a man running multiple communications simultaneously. Then, her phone just pinged off a cell tower 2 blocks east of the hospital. She's moving. Where is she going? I don't... He stopped. Then, oh no. What? She figured it out. His voice was flat, with the particular flatness of someone who'd just seen 3 steps ahead and didn't like what was there. Victoria knew Marcus before this. They worked together briefly 2 years ago when she first brought me her investigation. She spent 3 months in proximity to my organization. He paused. She knows where Marcus's personal office is, the one off the books. The one I never told you about because almost no one knows it exists. She's going there. She's going there alone. Because she doesn't want to wait for you to be ready, Claire said. She understood it immediately. The logic of a woman who had spent 14 months waiting. She's been patient for a year and a half. She's done being patient. She also has a fractured radius and is 24 hours out of a trauma admission. His voice was tight. She cannot... I know. Claire was already moving back toward the door. Which tower? Claire. Which direction? Adrian. A beat. East on Harrison. There's a building on the corner of Harrison and Dwight. 7 floors, gray facade, a financial consulting firm on the lobby level. Marcus uses the 4th floor. His voice was hard. Do not go in. I need you to understand that. Find her before she gets inside and you wait for me. Understood. Claire. I heard you. Say it back to me. She was already at the stairwell door. I find her, I wait for you, I do not go inside. She pushed through. 10 minutes. 12. I'm running. Then run faster. She hung up and went down the stairs at a speed that was very close to running. She found Victoria half a block from the building. Not because Victoria was moving slowly. She was moving with the focused, slightly rigid pace of someone overriding physical pain with sheer will. But because Claire had come out of the hospital's east exit and cut through the alley that took 2 minutes off the direct route, and she knew the neighborhood the way anyone knew a neighborhood they'd worked in for 6 years. Victoria. She fell into step beside her, matching her pace. Stop. I can't stop. Victoria didn't look at her. Her arm was in its splint, held carefully against her body. Her color was wrong, the pale determination of someone spending physical resources they didn't have. I know where Marcus keeps his files, not the Federal Street copies. The working files, the originals of the communications he used to broker the information to Calloway. Those are in his office. If we have those, Calloway can't claim Marcus acted alone without his knowledge. Adrian is 12 minutes out. 12 minutes is too long. Now she looked at Claire. Her green eyes were sharp and clear and exhausted all at once. Calloway knows about the Federal Street documents. Even with what Doyle passed to the federal contact, Calloway will have his legal team arguing the chain of custody within an hour of being served. We need the communications. Without them, Calloway walks. And if Calloway walks... She stopped. He comes after me, she said simply. He comes after my sister. And eventually, he comes after you. Claire looked at her. You can't go in there with a fractured radius and 24 hours of post-trauma in your system. No, Victoria agreed. But you can come with me. Adrian said. Adrian is not here. Victoria met her eyes directly. Dr. Bennett, Claire. I am asking you as myself, not as a patient, not as a victim, not as a piece of evidence in someone else's case, to help me finish this. I have been building toward this moment for 14 months. I know exactly where those files are. I can be in and out of that office in 8 minutes. If Marcus is there, Marcus is not there. His car is not in the building's lot. I checked on the way. He's running, which means his office is unoccupied, and we have a window that closes the moment he stops running and sends someone back to clear it. Victoria's voice was completely steady. 8 minutes. That's all I'm asking. Claire looked at the building, then at Victoria. Then she made the same kind of decision she'd been making for the past 36 hours. Not the safe one, not the professionally advisable one, but the one that aligned with the thing she'd believed since her first day in medicine. Every person deserved a chance to be saved, including the ones who were trying to save themselves. 8 minutes, Claire said. And if anything feels wrong, we leave immediately. Victoria almost smiled. Deal. The financial consulting firm's lobby receptionist barely looked up when they walked in. Claire in her street clothes. Victoria in the civilian clothing. Someone had brought from her apartment. At some point, they looked like professionals with a meeting. The elevator was empty. 4th floor. Victoria moved through the corridor with the certainty of someone who had memorized it. 3rd door, she said quietly. He keeps the secondary lock disabled. When he's working here, he loses keys. She tried the handle. It opened. They went in. The office was what Claire expected from a man who operated in the space between legitimate and not organized efficient. Nothing decorative except what served a function. A desk. Filing cabinets. A laptop closed. And on the desk, as though Marcus had been working and left in a hurry, 3 stacked folders and a portable hard drive. Victoria went directly to the folders. She opened the first one. Her eyes moved fast, practiced trained speed reading. She closed it and opened the second. Here, she said. Claire looked over her shoulder. Printed communications, dates, names, amounts. The particular bureaucratic clarity of financial corruption. The way that money moving wrong still left a paper trail because money always needed to account for itself somewhere. Victoria pulled her phone from her pocket, the one she'd taken from her bedside table, and began photographing each page systematically. 6 minutes, Claire said. I know. Click. Click. I need the 3rd folder and the hard drive. Take the hard drive. I'll photograph the 3rd folder. Victoria looked at her. You've done this before. I've documented evidence in emergency cases my entire career. Claire picked up the folder and her own phone. This is the same thing with higher stakes. Go. They worked in silence for 4 minutes, moving with the compressed efficiency of 2 people who had independently developed high-functioning precision under pressure and were now apparently applying it together. Claire photographed the last page. Victoria pocketed the hard drive. Done, Victoria said. They left the folder exactly as they'd found it. They were back in the corridor when Claire's phone buzzed. Morelli. I'm in the lobby. Where are you? She typed back, 4th floor. Coming down. They were in the elevator when it buzzed again. But this time, it wasn't Morelli. It was a hospital number. Dr. Wells's office. She answered. Dr. Bennett? Wells's voice was professional. Tight. I need you to come back to the hospital immediately. I'm on my way back now. Is there a patient situation? Not a patient situation. A pause that told her something before the words did. Dr. Reeves has been taken into custody by federal agents in the hospital. They've also asked to speak with you. Another pause. Claire, there are also two men here who say they represent Richard Calloway, and they have a legal document that they claim gives them authority over Victoria Hayes's medical decisions. The elevator doors opened. Morelli was standing in the lobby. He took one look at both of them, at Claire on the phone, at Victoria with her color wrong and her arm rigid against her body, and his expression said several things simultaneously, none of which he voiced. "We'll be there in 5 minutes," Claire told Wells. She hung up. She looked at Morelli. "Reeves has been arrested," she said. "Federal agents. They want to talk to me. And Calloway's lawyers are at the hospital with a legal document about Victoria." Morelli absorbed this without visible reaction. Then he looked at Victoria. "Did you get them?" "Everything. The hard drive. And photographs of the communications file." Something moved across Morelli's face, relief and fury occupying the same space. "You were supposed to wait," he said. "I didn't have time to wait," Victoria said. "You had a fractured arm and—" "Adrian." Her voice was quiet. "We have what we need. Can the rest of this conversation happen later?" He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Claire. "You went with her." "She needed someone with her." Claire met his eyes. "And she was going regardless." His jaw moved. "I told you to wait for me." "You also told me," Claire said, "that Victoria mattered more than the evidence." She held his gaze. "She was about to go in there alone with a fractured radius, so I made a call. You can be angry about it later." The lobby was quiet around them. The receptionist was absorbed in her screen. Traffic moved past the glass exterior. Morelli looked at her. And then something happened in his expression that she hadn't seen before. Not the controlled composure. Not the calculation. Not even the fear she'd seen the first night. Something simpler. Something that didn't have a professional name. He looked for just a moment, like someone who had been alone with something very heavy for a long time and had unexpectedly found someone standing beside him. It lasted perhaps 2 seconds. Then it was gone, filed away behind the composure, and he was already moving. "We go back to the hospital," he said. "Together. The federal agents who arrested Reeves, I know who they're reporting to. I can make a call." He pulled his phone out. "The document Calloway's lawyers brought, it's almost certainly a medical power of attorney. Fraudulent. Victoria's signature will have been forged." He looked at Victoria. "You've never signed anything giving Calloway legal authority over your medical decisions." "Of course not." "Then the document collapses the moment you contest it in person." He was already dialing. "Can you walk back to the hospital?" "I walked here, didn't I?" Victoria said. "You walked here on adrenaline and stubbornness." His voice was dry, but there was something underneath it that was not dry at all. "The adrenaline is wearing off. I can see it." Victoria looked at him. "Stop seeing everything," she said. "It's a significant personal flaw." He raised the phone to his ear. Claire fell into step beside Victoria as they moved toward the exit. "How's the pain?" she asked quietly. 8, Victoria said. "You told me 6 this morning." "This morning I hadn't walked 6 blocks and broken into an office." "Fair." Claire adjusted her pace to match Victoria's, which was slowing incrementally. "When we get back, you go directly to your room. I'll deal with the federal agents and Calloway's lawyers." "You shouldn't have to. I'm the attending physician." Claire looked at her steadily. "Which means legally, medically, and procedurally, I am the gatekeeper for everything related to your care. A forged power of attorney cannot override a treating physician's assessment of a patient's capacity and best interest. Not in Massachusetts." She paused. "They can bring whatever document they want. They have to come through me to use it." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "You know," she said, "when I asked you to send that message 3 nights ago, I thought I was asking for a courier." "I know. You're considerably more than a courier." "I'm a doctor," Claire said. "We contain multitudes." Victoria looked at her. And then, for the first time since Claire had met her through 2 trauma stabilizations, 1, middle of the night ICU conversation, 1 unauthorized office entry, and 36 hours of sustained crisis. Victoria Hayes laughed. It was small. It hurt her ribs, and she pressed her good arm against them. But it was real. They entered the hospital through the main entrance because Victoria needed the image of it, needed Calloway's lawyers, whoever was watching, to see her walking in upright and conscious, and not under anyone's control but her own. Morelli had arranged that. Without being asked, without discussion, he'd simply moved to Victoria's other side, so that she was flanked, and he'd adjusted their pace so it looked like choice rather than necessity. And by the time they came through the doors into the lobby, they looked like 3 people arriving with purpose. Which they were. Dr. Wells was waiting near the reception desk. Beside him were 2 men in suits who had the specific look of attorneys. Expensive suits. The kind of facial expression that had been engineered to convey authority while revealing nothing. Behind Wells, further back, 2 other figures, a man and a woman with federal identification visible on lanyards. Wells looked at Claire with an expression that was trying very hard to stay neutral and not entirely succeeding. "Dr. Bennett," he said. "Dr. Wells." She kept walking toward him. "I understand there's been some activity while I was out." One of the suited men stepped forward. "Ms. Hayes." He addressed Victoria directly, stepping around Claire with the practiced ease of someone who expected people to move for him. "My name is Aldridge. I represent Richard Calloway. I have a legal document." "I'm sure you do," Victoria said. She didn't stop walking. "Have your office contact my attorney, whose name and number you'll find on file with the hospital's administration. This document supersedes Mr. Aldridge." Claire stepped between him and Victoria smoothly, not aggressively, not dramatically, just occupying the space that he'd been moving through. "I'm Dr. Bennett, Ms. Hayes' attending physician. Any legal documents related to my patient's care are subject to review by our legal department before I can act on them. That review process takes a minimum of 48 hours. In the meantime, I am the clinical decision-maker regarding her care." She met his eyes pleasantly. "You're welcome to contact our legal department. The number is at the main reception desk." Aldridge looked at her with the expression of a man who had used his professional authority as a door for 20 years and had just encountered a wall. "This is 48 hours, Claire said. "Standard protocol." She turned to the federal agents. The woman stepped forward. "Dr. Bennett, I'm Special Agent Torres, FBI. We have some questions about events that occurred in this hospital over the past 36 hours. Of course." Claire kept her voice professional, cooperative. "I'm happy to speak with you. I do want to note that I'll have legal counsel present for that conversation, standard practice when federal agents are involved. I can have someone here within an hour. Would that work?" Torres looked at her. "That's your right," she said. "Thank you." Claire turned to Wells. "Franklin, can we get Ms. Hayes back to her room? She's post-trauma and she needs to be off her feet." Wells looked between Claire and Morelli and Victoria with the expression of a man who understood that something significant had happened, and that he was standing in the middle of it, and that his job right now was to trust the physician he'd hired and promoted and watched operate under pressure for 6 years. "Of course," he said. The next 2 hours were the most procedurally intense of Claire's professional life. The federal agents, Torres and her partner, a quiet man named Reyes, who took careful notes, were in the hospital because Reeves's arrest was connected to a broader investigation into fraudulent medical record alteration that had been building for 8 months. Claire learned this from Torres during a conversation that took place in Wells's office with a hospital attorney present, and during which Claire told a carefully precise version of the truth. She had treated a patient with injuries inconsistent with the reported accident. She had documented what she found. She had had no contact with law enforcement because she was uncertain of the parameters of patient confidentiality in a case with potential criminal dimensions. All of that was true. The parts she omitted were also true, but they were not the parts that Torres was asking about. And Claire had learned in 36 hours that precision and completeness were not always the same thing. Torres knew about Calloway. Torres knew considerably more about Calloway than she let on in the initial conversation. By the end of the hour, what became clear to Claire was that the federal investigation into Calloway had been active for 14 months, almost exactly as long as Victoria had been gathering her own evidence, and that the two parallel efforts had been moving toward the same point from different directions without knowing about each other. Victoria Hayes, Torres said carefully near the end of the conversation. She's your patient. She is. Is she in a condition to be interviewed? Not today, Claire said. Possibly tomorrow with her physician present and her attorney present, and with a clear limitation on duration given her medical status. Torres looked at her with an expression that was measuring something. Dr. Bennett, she said. Off the record. I'm listening. The investigation into Calloway has a gap. The financial documentation we need the direct connection between his accounts and the shell company. We've been working to establish that connection for 8 months. Without it, we have circumstantial evidence that his legal team will dismantle in 6 weeks. She paused. If that documentation exists somewhere and could be made available through appropriate channels, the case closes. Calloway goes away. Everything connected to him, the corruption, the record falsification, the people he's hurt, it all gets addressed. Claire looked at her. I wouldn't know anything about documentation like that, Claire said. But it sounds like the kind of thing that if it existed, the person who had it would want to ensure it reached the right hands through a proper chain of custody. It does sound like that, Torres agreed. What would proper chain of custody look like in a situation like this? Torres told her. Claire listened carefully. At 6:47. Morelli stood in the corridor outside Victoria's room and made 2 phone calls. The first was to a federal prosecutor named Harrigan, who Torres had confirmed was the correct contact. The call lasted 9 minutes. When it ended, Morelli's expression had the quality of something releasing, not completely, not all at once, but the way a long-held tension began to unknot. The second call was shorter, 4 minutes. Claire, standing nearby, could hear only his side of it, but she could hear the name Doyle, and she could hear the word safe, and she could hear in the quality of Morelli's voice during those 4 minutes something that was not his professional register at all. When he hung up, he stood very still for a moment. Doyle is with Harrigan's office, he said. He's been cooperating with the federal investigation for 3 weeks. The documents he moved from Richardson went directly to the Federal Evidence Repository. He paused. He didn't tell me because he couldn't. The prosecutor's office asked him not to make contact with me until they were ready to move. His jaw worked. He was protecting me. Claire said nothing. 16 years, Morelli said. Not the way he'd said it before, not the weight of betrayal. This time it was something else. The weight of almost losing something that had turned out to be real. And Marcus? Claire asked. Calloway's, he said flatly. Turned 2 years ago. The financial pressure Calloway had documentation of a transaction that would have destroyed Marcus professionally. Classic leverage. He stopped. I missed it. For 2 years I missed it. You trusted someone, Claire said. I trusted the wrong someone. You also trusted Victoria and Doyle. She looked at him directly. 2 out of 3 in circumstances where the third was being blackmailed into deception. That's not a failure of judgment. That's a situation someone else engineered. Morelli looked at her. You defend people very well, he said. I defend people accurately, she said. There's a difference. He looked at her for a long moment. One of those moments that had started to accumulate since the first night, the ones where something moved between them that didn't have a clean professional name. I owe you something, he said. You don't. I put you in a position that... I put myself in it, Claire said. I sent the message. I made the choices after that. You didn't recruit me. You didn't manipulate me into anything. You told me the truth when I asked for it, and then you respected my decisions even when you disagreed with them. She paused. That's considerably more than most people in complicated situations manage. He was quiet. The FBI will want to interview you formally, he said. I know. I'm ready for that. Your hospital's legal team. Wells already called them. They'll be here tomorrow morning. She looked at him steadily. I've documented everything that's documentable. My clinical notes are airtight. What I did outside the hospital this afternoon. She paused. I retrieved personal items for a patient who was unable to do so herself. That's a defensible description. Barely. Barely is enough. His mouth moved almost toward a smile. Barely is enough, he repeated. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. His expression shifted, not alarm, but something significant. Harrigan's office, he said. They're moving tonight. Calloway will be served with the federal arrest warrant before midnight. Claire absorbed that. 36 hours ago, she had been finishing notes on a chest trauma case and waiting for the next page. Tonight, she said. Tonight. He pocketed the phone. It's over. Or the beginning of over, which in legal terms means approximately 18 months of proceedings. But the part where people are in danger, that part is over. Claire looked at the door to Victoria's room. She thought about what over meant for the woman on the other side of it. Not the legal proceedings, not the testimony that would have to be given, the memories that would have to be relived in formal rooms with court reporters and opposing counsel. But the part where every door she opened was a potential threat. The part where her sister's life was a bargaining chip. The part where 14 months of damage had been written out of the official record as though it had never happened. That part being over. I need to go check on my patient, Claire said. She pushed the door open. Victoria was awake, sitting up against her pillows, with the careful posture of someone managing pain deliberately. She looked at Claire's face, and read it the way she read everything: fast, precise, thorough. It's done, Victoria said. Almost, Claire said. Tonight. Victoria closed her eyes. She didn't cry. She didn't react in any of the ways that the moment might have seemed to call for. She simply closed her eyes and breathed slowly and deliberately, the way a person breathed when they were letting something go that had been held for a very long time. Then she opened them. My sister, she said. Morelli has people with her. Claire sat down in the chair beside the bed. She's safe. Victoria nodded once. Then she looked at Claire with an expression that was direct and clear, and stripped of everything except what it was. I asked a stranger in an emergency room to send a message, she said. I did it because I had no other options, and because something in your face told me you would do it. She paused. I didn't anticipate what that would actually mean, what it would ask of you. You were trying to survive, Claire said. I was, but you didn't have to help me as far as you did. No, Claire agreed. Why did you? Claire thought about it. The real answer, not the professional one. Because the body on my table told the truth, she said finally. And I've spent 6 years believing that the truth I find in an examination is the thing I'm obligated to act on. Not the paperwork, not the official version, the actual physical truth. She paused. Your body told me what had happened to you. Once I knew that I couldn't unknow it. And once I couldn't unknow it, every choice after that was just the next right thing. Victoria looked at her. The next right thing, she said quietly. It's not a complicated philosophy, Claire said, but it tends to take you interesting places. From the corridor, Morelli's voice filtered through the closed door. He was on the phone again, managing the mechanics of the next stage of things. His voice was low and controlled, and completely present the way it always was, the engine of his particular competency running steadily. Victoria looked toward the sound and then back at Claire. He respects you, Victoria said. In a way I haven't seen him respect many people. He respects that I'm not afraid of him. More than that, Victoria's voice was quiet. He respects that you see him clearly and choose engagement anyway. That's rarer than fearlessness. She paused. Adrian has spent a long time being seen as only one thing, either the powerful man or the dangerous one, never the one underneath. Claire didn't respond to that directly, but she stayed in the chair beside the bed until Victoria fell asleep, which took 12 minutes, and she sat in the quiet of the room, listening to the monitors and the corridor outside and the city beyond the window doing its nighttime work. And she thought about seeing clearly and choosing engagement anyway, and about what that meant and what it might continue to mean. Her phone buzzed. Morelli. Calloway is in federal custody as of 11:41 p.m. It's done. She looked at the message. Then she looked at Victoria asleep, with her arm in its splint, and her breathing slow and even, and her body finally doing the repair work it hadn't been safe enough to do for 14 months. She typed back 2 words. "Thank you." His response was immediate. "No. Thank you." Then after a pause, "Get some sleep. You've earned it." She set her phone down on the chair arm and looked at the ceiling for a moment. She thought about 6 words sent into the dark of a midnight ER. She thought about what they had become. And then, because she was a physician, and she was tired, and her patient was breathing steadily, and the immediate danger was over, she let her eyes close for a few minutes and let the accumulated weight of 36 hours settle and rest and begin slowly. Quietly, the way all real things began to transform into something that was simply the next part of what came after. She slept for 3 hours in the chair beside Victoria's bed. Not good sleep. The same fragmented surface-level rest she'd managed on the break room couch 2 nights before, her body shutting down from necessity, while her mind kept a loose half-conscious watch on the monitors and the door. But when she woke at 2:43 in the morning, Victoria was still breathing steadily. The readings were stable, and the corridor outside was quiet, with the particular quiet of a hospital at its lowest ebb. That strange window between midnight chaos and the first light of a new shift, when the building itself seemed to exhale. Claire sat up slowly. Her neck ached. Her back ached. She was still in her street clothes from the afternoon, and she had not eaten since the morning, and the coffee she'd thought about getting approximately 6 times throughout the day had never materialized. She looked at her phone. 4 texts from Morelli sent between midnight and 2 a.m. The first, Calloway is being processed. His attorneys tried to get an emergency bail hearing and were denied. The second, Marcus has been picked up in Providence. He cooperated immediately. No honor among certain kinds of men. The third, Doyle is fine. Gave a 7-hour debrief to Harrigan's team. He wanted me to tell you his words that the doctor with the good instincts should sleep. The fourth, sent at 1:58 with no context and no follow-up. I keep thinking about something you said. The next right thing. I've been trying to remember the last time I thought in those terms. She read that last one twice. Then she put the phone in her pocket and went to the nurse's station to check Victoria's overnight chart, because that was the next right thing, and because some responses needed time before they became words. The morning brought the particular organized chaos that followed any event large enough to leave marks on a hospital's internal culture. Reeves's arrest had been processed through the institution overnight, and by 7 a.m. it was the unspoken subject of every conversation at every station on every floor. The kind of news that traveled through a hospital. The way all significant internal news traveled, which was to say instantly and comprehensively via the invisible network of people who noticed things and spoke to each other in corridors and break rooms, and the 30-second windows between tasks. Dr. Franklin Wells called Claire into his office at 7:30. He looked like a man who had not slept either, but who had used his sleepless hours productively. He had clearly spent them making phone calls, and reading documents, and consulting with legal counsel, and assembling a coherent institutional response to the discovery that one of his senior attending physicians had been paid to falsify patient records. "I need to understand the full sequence of events," he said. "Starting from the moment Victoria Hayes arrived in your ER." "I know," Claire said. "The FBI will formally interview you at 10. Hospital legal will be present." He paused. "Claire, before that happens, I need to know from you directly. Is there anything that occurred over the past 48 hours that creates legal exposure for this hospital?" She looked at him. This was the real question. Not the procedural one, not the official one. The one that came from a man who had run a good institution for 20 years and needed to know whether the ground under it was solid. "I documented a patient's real injuries accurately," she said. "I maintained her confidentiality appropriately. I made clinical decisions in her best interest." She paused. "Everything I did, I would do again. And everything I did, I can defend in any room to anybody, under any standard of review." Wells looked at her. "And the parts that happened outside this hospital," he said carefully. "I assisted a patient in retrieving personal documents she needed for her own legal protection," Claire said. "That's the accurate clinical description." Another look. All right, he said finally. All right. He picked up his pen, then set it back down. For what it's worth, what you've been doing here for 6 years, the way you practice, the standards you hold. He stopped. I want you to know that none of what happened with Reeves reflects my judgment of this department. It reflects his choices, not this institution's character. I know that, Claire said. Good. He straightened. FBI at 10. Don't be late. The federal interview lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. Special Agent Torres was methodical and precise, and asked every question twice in different formulations. The technique of someone checking, not just what was said, but whether the saying of it was consistent. Claire answered everything she was asked with the same careful precision she brought to clinical documentation. She described her findings, her reasoning, her decisions. She described the message Victoria had asked her to send, and why she had sent it. She described her interactions with Morelli in terms of the factual sequence, without editorializing about the nature of those interactions. Torres asked about the Federal Street branch. I accompanied my patient to retrieve personal items, Claire said. She required physical support due to her injuries. I was present in a support capacity. Torres looked at her. Support capacity, she repeated. That's correct. A pause. Dr. Bennett. Torres said, I want to be direct with you. The evidence that came out of this situation, the documentation from Victoria Hayes. The records Doyle secured, the communications from Marcus's office, builds a case against Richard Calloway that our office has been attempting to construct for over a year. Without the events of the past 48 hours, we would not have it. She paused. I'm not going to examine your methods of patient support too closely. But I need you to understand that if anything about your role in this becomes a defense argument for Calloway's team, I'm a physician, Claire said. I treated a patient. I followed where that treatment led. If Calloway's attorneys want to build a defense around the professional conduct of the doctor who documented his victim's injuries accurately, I welcome that conversation in court. Torres looked at her for a long moment. Then something shifted almost imperceptibly in the agent's professional composure. A slight easing that might, in a different context, have been the beginning of a smile. We'll be in touch, Torres said. Victoria was discharged on the 3rd day. Not to her own apartment. That location was being treated as potentially compromised until Calloway's network could be fully mapped, which the FBI estimated would take several weeks. She went instead to a secure address that Morelli had arranged and that Claire was not given and did not ask for, because there was a point at which clinical involvement appropriately ended and other kinds of care took over. The discharge conversation happened in the morning, with Claire sitting across from Victoria in the room that had held them both through 2 days of sustained crisis. The monitoring equipment removed. Now the room feeling larger without it. The fracture will need 8 weeks in a proper cast, Claire said. I want you seeing an orthopedic specialist within the week. I'll give you a referral. The rib bruising will resolve on its own, but I don't want you lifting anything heavy or pushing your respiratory system for the next 3 weeks. She paused. And Victoria? I know, Victoria said. I mean it about the orthopedic specialist. The radius healed incorrectly the first time because it wasn't treated. I'm not going to let that happen again. You won't be my physician after today, Victoria said. No, Claire agreed. But I'll be the person who knows exactly how those bones are supposed to heal, and I'll know if you don't get them looked at properly. She held Victoria's gaze. So get them looked at properly. Victoria looked at her for a moment. You know, she said, you have a very particular way of giving instructions. Occupational characteristic. It's effective. A pause. Thank you. For all of it. Not just the medicine. The medicine was the easy part, Claire said. Victoria tilted her head. Is that true? Claire thought about it honestly. No, she said. None of it was easy. But it was right. That's a different thing. Victoria nodded slowly. It is. She stood carefully, with the measured movement of someone who had learned to respect what their body was telling them. She picked up the small bag that had been brought for her and held it with her good arm. He'll come to find you, she said. Not as a question. Claire looked at her. Morelli, Victoria said. When things are settled enough, he'll come. She paused. I'm saying not because I'm telling you what to do with that. I'm saying it because you should know it's intentional, not impulsive. He doesn't do things impulsively. I know, Claire said. Good. Victoria moved toward the door. Then she stopped. The 6 words you sent. She survived. They know you know. Yes. Victoria was quiet for a moment. I chose those words carefully. I knew what they would communicate to him. The urgency. The stakes. She turned to look at Claire one more time. I didn't know what they would set in motion for you. I'm sorry for that. Don't be, Claire said. I am anyway. Victoria. Claire met her eyes. I'm not. Something settled in Victoria's expression. She nodded once. And then she walked out. 2 weeks passed. They were not quiet weeks. The Calloway arrest had become significant news, the kind that generated daily headlines and legal commentary, and the particular media attention that attached to the collision of wealth corruption and institutional failure. Reeves's name appeared in those stories. The falsified medical records appeared in those stories. Hargrove's name appeared in those stories, which meant Wells was managing an institutional communications situation that aged him visibly over the course of several days. Claire's name appeared once as a treating physician who had identified the original discrepancies. She was described in 3 words: a hospital doctor. She was grateful for the anonymity. She worked her shifts. She treated her patients. She went home to her apartment where her doorman greeted her with the same easy warmth he always had. And her Sunday phone call with her mother was careful and normal in the way it was careful and normal when there was something significant that she was not ready to describe. She thought about the past 48 hours, the way she thought about particularly difficult cases after they resolved, not obsessively, but returning to them at intervals, examining what she had done and why, checking the decisions against her own standards. Asking herself the physician's version of the question, given the same information, the same moment, would I do it again? Every time she asked it, the answer was yes. On the 11th day, her phone showed a text from a number she recognized. I'd like to buy you, if you're willing. She looked at the message for a moment. Then she typed back, that depends. His reply: on what? On whether it's Adrian Morelli, the public figure, buying dinner for the doctor who helped him. Or someone else. A pause. Longer than his usual pauses. Someone else, he wrote. Considerably less certain of himself. Possibly better company. She looked at that for a moment. Then Saturday, 7 o'clock. You pick the place. Nothing that requires a reservation made 6 weeks in advance. His reply took 4 seconds. I know a place. Saturday arrived with the particular quality of October evenings in Boston, the air carrying the first real edge of cold, the kind that arrived not aggressively, but with a quiet certainty that summer was finished and something more serious had taken its place. He had picked a restaurant on the waterfront. Not the kind that announced itself no valet, no name in large letters. The sort of place that communicated its quality through restraint rather than display. Claire arrived on time and found him already there, which she noted because it was the kind of thing that told you something about a person. He was not in the suit that newspapers photographed. He was in something simpler. Dark jacket, no tie, the version of himself that existed when the performance of authority was optional. He stood when she came in, and there was a brief moment that was slightly awkward, in the way that first moments were between people who had met under extreme circumstances and were now attempting to locate each other in ordinary life. She sat down. He sat down. A waiter appeared, and they ordered wine without ceremony, and then the waiter went away, and they were alone at the table with the specific quality of silence that belonged to 2 people who had seen each other under the kind of pressure that stripped everything extraneous away. How are you? He said. Better than 2 weeks ago, she said. You? The same. A pause. Doyle is officially consulting for the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. He finds it deeply ironic. How does he feel about almost being suspected of being the leak? He has accepted my apology more graciously than I deserved. His jaw moved. 16 years. I should have known. You were working with incomplete information and someone who was very good at being 2 things at once. She looked at him steadily. You know what the clinical literature says about that kind of situation? About how intelligent people miss deception in long-term trusted relationships. I imagine it says something reassuring. It says it's nearly universal. The closer the relationship, the harder the deception is to see. Because your brain uses the history of trustworthiness as a filter that the present information has to pass through. She picked up her wine. You're not a failure of judgment. You're a human being with a 16-year data set that someone exploited. He looked at her. You do that very naturally, he said. Do what? Translate things into frameworks that make sense. Take something that feels like a moral failing and locate it accurately in the mechanics of how people actually work. He was quiet for a moment. It's a doctor's skill. Or maybe it's yours specifically. Probably both, she said. The food arrived, and they ate, and the conversation moved. The way conversation moved when two people who were genuinely curious about each other were also both relatively private, carefully at first, then with more ease, finding the rhythm that either existed between two people or didn't, and discovering fairly quickly that it did. He asked about what had drawn her to emergency medicine. She told him honestly, not the polished version, not the one she gave in professional contexts, but the real one. The adrenaline, yes, but more than that, the specific satisfaction of arriving at a moment that had already gone wrong and making it go better. The feeling of being useful at the exact point where useless would be catastrophic. She asked him about the legitimate business empire, not the criminal side, not the public controversy, but the actual work of running something that large and that complex. He talked about it with a directness she hadn't expected: the logistics, the decisions, the particular challenge of managing organizations where the people at the bottom were depending on choices made at the top to have been made well. You think about that, she said. The people at the bottom. I always have. He looked at her. That's not a defense of everything else. It's just accurate. I know, she said. He looked at her for a moment. Victoria told you things, he said. Some. What do you actually think of what I am, what I've been? It was a direct question, the kind that required a direct answer. I think, Claire said carefully, that you made choices a long time ago that closed certain doors, and that you've been living inside those closed rooms for long enough that you stopped checking whether the doors were still locked. She paused. I think the person who showed up at my hospital at midnight because a woman he cared about was hurt, that person is real. I think the person who told me the truth when a convenient version would have served him better, that person is real. She looked at him. And I think that what a person does when things are genuinely hard tells you considerably more about who they are than anything they do when it's easy. Howe was quiet for a long moment. The rooms, he said. You think the doors are unlocked. I think you haven't tried them recently. She held his gaze. I think the past 2 weeks might be evidence of what happens when you do. Something moved in his expression. Not the composure, not the calculation. Not even the vulnerability she'd seen in flashes since the first night. Something quieter than all of those. More settled. I've been restructuring, he said. The organization, the financial interests. What can be made legitimate is being made legitimate. What can't is being ended. He paused. It's a significant process. It will take time, and it will cost more than the money. I know, she said. I'm telling you because I want you to know where I am, not where I was. He looked at her directly. Not because I'm asking for anything in return. Just because you deserve accurate information. She looked at him. Adrian, she said. Yes, I'm a physician. I deal in accurate information professionally. She picked up her wine glass. The part where you tell me the truth about yourself. Keep doing that. The rest of it, the process, the time it takes, what it costs. None of that is something I'm measuring you against. People are allowed to be in the middle of becoming something. She paused. That's not a naive thing to believe. It's the most empirically supported thing I know. I've watched bodies repair damage that anyone would have said was permanent. The capacity for change is not inspirational language, it's biology. He looked at her for a long moment, and then quietly and completely, he laughed. Not the controlled, almost smile she'd seen before. A real one. Brief, a little surprised, entirely genuine. It changed his face in a way she hadn't anticipated. She found that she was smiling too. Biology, he said. It's a strong argument, she said. It is. He looked at her with something that was warm and clear and entirely unmanaged. It really is. 3 months later, the Callaway trial began. It was exactly what federal prosecutions of that magnitude always were. Slow, procedurally dense, intensely covered by the legal press, and ultimately moving toward an outcome that had been determined by the quality of the evidence long before the first day of testimony. The evidence was very good. Victoria testified on the 4th day of the prosecution's case. She was composed in the way that people who have lived through something genuinely terrible were sometimes composed not because it didn't hurt, but because they had decided that the pain of telling the truth was the price of the truth being told, and they had made that choice before they ever sat down at the witness stand. Claire watched from the gallery. She had been given a seat by Torres, who had called her the week before the trial opened, with what Claire had come to recognize as the agent's particular version of warmth, which expressed itself in professional courtesy rather than personal effusion. "You'll want to be there for the first week," Torres had said. "The evidence you documented is part of the core medical record. The defense will try to challenge it. I want you in the room when they try." They tried on day 3. Callaway's lead attorney, a man named Prescott, who charged what small nation spent on infrastructure, spent 40 minutes suggesting that Claire's documentation of Victoria's injuries had been influenced by her relationship with the defendant's other adversaries. Claire was called to the stand. She sat in the witness chair and looked at Prescott and answered every question with the same clinical precision she'd applied to every other demanding situation in the past 3 months. "Dr. Bennett," Prescott said, "isn't it true that you had contact with Adrian Morelli, a known criminal figure, while this patient was under your care?" "I had contact with a visitor to my hospital who identified himself as connected to the patient," Claire said. "I treated that contact the same way I would treat contact from any visitor to a patient in my care, with professional standards governing what information I shared and what I did not." "You allowed him access to the patient." "I allowed a visitor to see a patient who was conscious and capable of deciding whether she wished to receive visitors. The patient chose to see him, and in the course of that visit, I was present as the treating physician," Claire said, "as I would be for any visitor interaction with a post-trauma patient requiring monitoring." Prescott changed directions. "Dr. Bennett, your documentation of the patient's injuries, the characterization of old fractures, the suggestion of sustained abuse, you made that determination within hours of her arrival. Isn't it possible that you were influenced by—" "The documentation I made was based on physical examination findings," Claire said. "Fracture staging is determined by radiological and clinical evidence, not by narrative. The healing stage of a fracture is visible on imaging. The pattern of bruising is observable on examination. What I documented is what I found. The evidence either supports it or it doesn't." She paused. "The prosecution's independent medical experts have reviewed my documentation and confirmed every finding. If you'd like to challenge the physical evidence of your client's actions, I'd suggest that conversation be with the radiologists." The jury looked at her. Prescott looked at her. He moved to another line of questioning. When she stepped down from the stand, Torres gave her the agent's version of a nod, which was brief and precise, and conveyed a complete thought. The verdict came 6 weeks later. Guilty on all counts, 12 of them. Claire was in the hospital when the notification came through. She was always in the hospital, and she read it standing at the nurse's station between patients. Her phone in her hand, the notification from the news service she'd set up to alert her when it broke. She stood there for a moment. Then she put her phone in her pocket and went to her next patient, because that was who she was and what she did. And some things were celebrated in small private ways rather than large public ones. That evening, her phone showed a text from Victoria. "It's done. I want you to know that your name, the accuracy of your documentation, is part of why." The defense spent 3 weeks trying to undermine the medical evidence. They couldn't. "Because you were thorough." A pause between messages. "Thank you. For the last time. I promise to stop thanking you." Claire typed back, "You're allowed to keep thanking me. I'll keep telling you it wasn't necessary. We can do this indefinitely." Victoria's response was immediate. "I suspect we will." Then an hour later, a text from Morelli. No words this time. Just a photograph. A view from what appeared to be a high floor of a building city. Lights below the harbor visible in the distance, the particular nighttime version of Boston that she knew from 6 years of living in it. Ordinary and beautiful simultaneously, the way the real things always were. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she typed, "Where is that?" His reply, "My office. The one I'm in the process of making into something different." She looked at the photograph again. "It's a good view," she typed. "It is," he wrote back. "Better with context." A pause. "I've been thinking about what you said. About doors and whether they're still locked." She waited. "I tried one," he wrote. "You were right. It opened." She sat with that for a moment. Then she typed, "Which one?" His response came slowly, as though he was considering the exact words. "The one that required me to stop being only the thing I became and start being the thing I was before I decided the other options were closed." He paused. "I don't have a clean way to describe it. I'm working on the language." "You have time," she typed. "Yes," he wrote back. "I do. And then dinner again. When you're ready. No urgency." She looked at that. She thought about the night in the emergency room, when she had read 6 words from a folded piece of paper in the bottom of a shoe, and made a decision that her entire previous life had not prepared her for and had not been able to predict. She thought about what the body of a woman she'd never met had told her and what she had chosen to do with that truth. She thought about how the next right thing taken seriously and followed honestly did not always lead somewhere comfortable, but it led somewhere real. She typed back, "Saturday. 7 o'clock. His reply arrived in 3 seconds. "I know a place." 6 months after the night, Victoria Hayes arrived in her emergency room. Claire Bennett stood at her workstation at the beginning of a Thursday shift and looked at the board the way she always did. The incoming cases, the status of the beds, the particular human landscape of people in crisis that her day would be spent moving through. She was still 32 years old. She still had a license, a lease, a retirement account, and a mother who called every Sunday. She still believed, as she had always believed, that every person deserved a chance to be saved. What was different was this. She understood now with a clarity that practice and ordinary life had not given her that saving people was not always a clinical act. That the truth a body told was not always the only truth that mattered. That the next right thing sometimes led through rooms she had never prepared to enter, and that entering them anyway, not recklessly, not without fear, but with both eyes open and her own standards intact, was not a departure from who she was. It was exactly who she was. Victoria Hayes was somewhere in Boston, building a career in survivor advocacy, working with the same methodical precision she had once applied to financial investigation. This time applied to creating pathways for people caught in situations they couldn't document or prove. She called Claire once a week. The calls were short. They were honest. They were the beginning of a friendship that had been forged in extraordinary circumstances and was proving in the ordinary light of weekly life to be real. Thomas Doyle was consulting for federal financial crimes investigators with the particular competence of a man who had spent 16 years understanding how money moved in ways it wasn't supposed to. He had sent Claire a handwritten note 6 weeks after the trial. It said, "The doctor with the good instincts, Doyle. Thank you for not getting yourself killed." She had kept it. She wasn't entirely sure why, except that it made her laugh, and laughing at the specific absurdity of how far 6 words had traveled felt like the appropriate response. Adrian Morelli was becoming slowly, and at significant cost, something different from what he had been. It was not a clean process. It was not complete. The doors he was opening were not all easy to walk through, and some of the rooms behind them were harder than he had anticipated. He told her this on Saturdays, over the kind of dinner that didn't require reservations made 6 weeks in advance, and she listened, the way she listened to everything with precision and without judgment, and with the clear-eyed understanding that change was not inspirational language. It was biology. And biology took time, and was not linear, and required patience from everyone involved, including the person doing the changing. She was patient. She was also honest, which he needed more than the patience, and which she had no capacity to stop being, even when it would have been easier. They were in the vocabulary that ordinary life offered for things that didn't fit neatly into existing categories, figuring it out. Which was, she had decided the most honest thing two real people in a real and complicated situation could be doing. On the morning board at the nurse's station, a new case appeared. A woman 40s brought in by ambulance. The triage note said vehicle accident. The vital signs said something was wrong in a way that the accident alone didn't explain. Claire put on her gloves. She moved toward the bay. Because there was a patient who needed her, and the truth was waiting to be found, and she had never once in her professional life looked at a person in crisis and made the choice to look away. And she never would. That was not the story of one remarkable night, or 6 extraordinary words, or the chain of decisions that followed them into places she could never have predicted. That was simply who Claire Bennett was, and who she had always been, and who she would remain in every emergency bay, in every honest conversation, in every moment that required someone to see the truth clearly, and choose without hesitation to act on it for every year of her life that followed. Some people were built for the ordinary. Claire Bennett was built for the next right thing. And the next right thing never stopped coming.